The thing about dying slowly was that it gave you time to notice all the small indignities along the way. Evelyn Mercer stood behind the counter of her father's trading post, watching old Samuel Pritchard pretend to browse the nearly empty shelves. He'd been looking at the same box of rusty nails for 10 minutes now, and they both knew he wasn't going to buy anything. Nobody was buying anything anymore. The post smelled like mildew and desperation, and the wood stove in the corner barely produced enough heat to keep ice from forming on the windows. "How's your father doing, Evelyn?" Samuel asked, not looking at her. "Same as yesterday," she said. That was a lie. Her father was worse. The cough that had started in October had turned into something that rattled in his chest like stones in a tin can. Doc Havering had stopped coming by after they couldn't pay him the third time, but before he left, he'd pulled Evelyn aside and told her the truth with the bluntness of a man who'd seen too many frontier winters. "Your dad's got maybe 2 months if he's lucky. The cold will kill him before the sickness does." Samuel finally put down the nails and shuffled toward the door. "You take care now." "You too, Mr. Pritchard." The bell above the door gave a weak jingle as he left. Through the frosted window, Evelyn watched him hurry down Red Hollow's main street, really just a strip of frozen mud between 2 rows of sagging buildings, with his coat pulled tight. The afternoon light was already failing, even though it was barely past 3 o'clock. Winter this far north didn't just arrive. It moved in like an occupying army and stayed until it decided you'd suffered enough. Evelyn walked to the stove and fed it the last piece of firewood from the box. She'd have to go out to the woodshed soon, and she was putting it off because the shed was 15 yards from the back door and the wind off the mountains could strip skin at this temperature. Small things. That's how you measured your life now, in trips to the woodshed, in how many hours the fire would last, in whether your father would make it through another night. The trading post had belonged to her grandfather first, built when Red Hollow was still called something else, and there were enough trappers and prospectors passing through to make commerce viable. Those days were gone. The easy gold was gone. The good fur routes were gone. Most of the people were gone too, and the ones who stayed were either too poor to leave or too stubborn to admit defeat. Evelyn was both. "Evie? That you?" Her father's voice came from the back room, weak and thready. She grabbed the kettle off the stove, barely warm, but better than nothing, and pushed through the curtain that separated the shop from their living quarters. Marcus Mercer sat propped up in bed, wrapped in every blanket they owned. He'd been a big man once, broad-shouldered and loud, the kind of person who filled a room just by walking into it. Now he looked like something the winter had already half finished with, hollow-cheeked, gray-skinned, shaking even under all those blankets. "Just me, Dad." Evelyn poured him a cup of the not-quite-hot-enough tea and sat on the edge of the bed. "You need to drink this." He took the cup with trembling hands. "Any customers today?" "Few." Another lie. Samuel didn't count as a customer when he didn't buy anything, and he'd been the only person to walk through the door since yesterday afternoon. Her father sipped the tea and didn't call her on the lie, which somehow made it worse. A year ago, he would have seen right through her. Now he was too tired to care or too far gone to notice. Either way, it felt like losing him in installments. "The Hendersons paid their tab yet?" he asked. The Hendersons had left town 3 weeks ago in the middle of the night, taking their unpaid tab with them. "Not yet." Marcus nodded slowly, his eyes already drifting closed. "We'll make it through, Evie. Always have." Except they wouldn't. They hadn't made it through in months. The debt ledger in the shop's back drawer told the real story. $240 owed to the bank in Silverton, another $160 to various suppliers who'd stopped shipping because they knew they'd never get paid. The trading post owned nothing except inventory that nobody wanted and a building that was worth less than the land it sat on. Evelyn waited until her father's breathing evened out into sleep, then went back to the shop. She opened the ledger because torturing herself had become a habit, ran her finger down the columns of red ink, and did the math she'd already done 100 times. Even if they sold everything, the shelves, the stove, every last rusty nail, they'd still be 2 months away from losing the post to the bank. And that was assuming her father lived 2 more months. She was still staring at the numbers when the bell above the door rang. Evelyn looked up, already preparing her shopkeeper smile, and felt it freeze on her face. The man standing in her doorway wasn't from Red Hollow. He was tall, taller than anyone she'd seen in town, and built like someone who'd spent his entire life doing hard physical labor in conditions that killed soft people. His coat was heavy fur, well made, the kind of thing that cost real money. Snow melted on his shoulders and in his dark hair, but he didn't seem to feel the cold that was pouring through the open door behind him. But it was his eyes that made Evelyn's stomach tighten. They were pale gray, almost colorless, and they looked at her with an intensity that felt like being assessed by something that knew how to hunt. "We're closing," Evelyn said, which was stupid because it was barely mid-afternoon and desperate shops didn't turn away customers. But her instincts were screaming at her that this man was dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with whether he'd pay for his purchases. "I'm not here to shop," the man said. His voice was low, rough, with an accent that marked him as northern border territory. "Are you Evelyn Mercer?" The fact that he knew her name made everything worse. "Who's asking?" "Ryland Vane." The name hit her like cold water. Everyone north of Silverton knew that name. Ryland Vane was the alpha of the largest wolf clan in the borderlands, which was a polite way of saying he ran the territories beyond the mountains like his own private kingdom. The stories about him ranged from frightening to apocalyptic depending on who was telling them. He'd supposedly killed a rival alpha with his bare hands. He'd burned an entire settlement that refused to pay tribute. He'd executed his own second-in-command for disloyalty and left the body hanging from the fortress gates as a warning. And now he was standing in her father's trading post, dripping snowmelt on the floor. "What do you want?" Evelyn's hand drifted toward the knife she kept under the counter. It wouldn't do much good against a man like Vane, but holding it might make her feel less helpless. Ryland's eyes tracked the movement, then returned to her face. "I want to make you an offer." "We're not interested in—" "Your father owes $400, Ryland interrupted. "The bank's going to foreclose in 60 days. You've got maybe 3 weeks of food left, less if the supply road stays closed. And Marcus won't live to see spring." Evelyn felt her face flush hot despite the cold. "Get out. I'll clear your debts. All of them. I'll make sure Red Hollow gets through the winter. Food, medicine, fuel. I'll station enough of my people on the supply roads to keep the raiders off. And I'll pay for your father's care, whatever he needs, for as long as he needs it." The offer was so absurdly generous that Evelyn knew there had to be a catch. Men like Ryland Vane didn't hand out charity. In exchange for what? "You." The word hung in the air between them like something solid. Evelyn laughed, a short, harsh sound that hurt her throat. "You want to buy me. I want you to marry me." That was somehow worse than if he'd just propositioned her outright. At least prostitution was an honest transaction. "You're insane. I need a mate," Ryland said, his tone absolutely matter-of-fact, like he was discussing grain prices. "Someone the southern settlements will accept, someone who can help bridge the gap between my territories and yours. You're respected in Red Hollow, despite your circumstances. Your family has history here, and you're smart enough to understand that this isn't about romance, it's about survival. My survival or yours?" "Both." Evelyn gripped the edge of the counter to keep her hands from shaking. "Why me?" "If you need some kind of political marriage, there have to be a dozen better options. Merchant daughters, council members' families. I don't want them," Ryland said. "I want you." There was something in the way he said it that made Evelyn's skin prickle. Not threatening exactly, but absolute. Like he'd already made his decision and was just waiting for reality to catch up. "This is insane," she repeated. "You walk in here, offer me money to marry you like you're buying livestock?" "I'm offering your father his life," Ryland interrupted quietly. "I'm offering Red Hollow a chance to survive the winter. And I'm offering you a choice, which is more than you'll have when the bank takes this building and you're left with nothing but a dying father and a town that's already written you off." The words shouldn't have hurt, but they did, probably because they were true. Evelyn had seen the way her neighbors looked at her lately, with pity, sure, but also with the uncomfortable relief of people watching someone else drown while they stood safely on shore. Nobody in Red Hollow had the resources to help. They were all just trying to survive. "I need time to think," Evelyn said. "You have until tomorrow night." "That's not—" "Yes, it is." Ryland moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the frame. For a moment, something flickered across his face, something that almost looked like hesitation, or maybe regret. but it was gone so fast Evelyn thought she might have imagined it. "I'll be staying at the inn. When you've decided, come find me." Then he was gone, letting in a blast of cold air that made the fire in the stove gutter. Evelyn stood alone in the empty shop, listening to the wind howl around the building's corners, and tried to figure out if she'd just been offered salvation or sold to the devil. Evelyn didn't sleep that night. She lay in her narrow bed, listening to her father cough in the next room, watching the shadows from the dying fire move across the ceiling. The wind rattled the shutters like it was trying to get in, and somewhere in town, a dog was barking in that continuous, desperate way that meant it was tied up and freezing. Alpha Ryland Vane. The idea was absurd, monstrous, impossible, and she was going to say yes. Not because she wanted to, she didn't. Not because she trusted him, she absolutely didn't. But because she'd spent the hours since he left running through every other option, and they all ended the same way, with her father dead and Red Hollow slowly emptying out until it was just another ghost town scattered across the frontier. At least this way, people would survive. Maybe her too. When gray dawn light finally started seeping through the shutters, Evelyn gave up on sleep. She got dressed in the dark, layered on every piece of warm clothing she owned, and went to check on her father. Marcus was awake, sitting up in bed and looking more alert than he had in days. For a moment, Evelyn felt a stab of hope. Maybe he was getting better. Maybe Doc Havering had been wrong. But then she saw the bright flush on his cheeks and knew it was just the fever giving him a temporary burst of clarity before it dragged him back down. "Morning, Evie." He smiled at her, and it was so close to his old smile that it made her chest ache. "You're up early." Couldn't sleep. She busied herself with building up the fire, not wanting him to see her face. "You want some breakfast?" "I could make porridge." "Sit down first." Evelyn sat. Her father studied her for a long moment. Something's wrong. What happened? She should have known she couldn't hide it from him, fever or not. Marcus Mercer had spent 40 years reading people as part of the trading business, and his daughter had never been good at lying to him anyway. "A man came by yesterday," Evelyn said slowly. "Made an offer." "What kind of offer?" So she told him. Not everything. She left out some of the harsher details, softened Ryland's bluntness into something more palatable, but enough that her father understood what was being proposed. When she finished, Marcus was quiet for a long time. "This man," he finally said. "Vane. You trust him?" "I don't know him well enough to trust him." "But you're considering it anyway." Evelyn met her father's eyes. "We're out of options, Dad. You know we are. The bank—" "I know about the bank." Marcus's voice was soft but firm. "I know about the debts. I'm dying, Evie, not stupid. I've known for months that we were sinking." Hearing him say it out loud somehow made it real in a way it hadn't been before. Evelyn felt her throat go tight. "Then you know why I have to do this?" "No." Her father reached out and took her hand. His grip was weak, but his gaze was steady. "You don't have to do anything, especially not sacrifice yourself for a building and an old man who's already lived his life. It's not just about the building. Yes, it is. And it's about me. And it's about this damn town that should have died years ago, but keeps stumbling along out of pure stubbornness." Marcus squeezed her hand. "Evie, listen to me. I don't want my last act in this world to be selling my daughter like property." "It's not like that," Evelyn said, even though she wasn't sure that was true. "Isn't it?" Her father's eyes were too knowing. "This Alpha, he's offering money and protection in exchange for you marrying him. That's a transaction, honey. And maybe it's a necessary one. Maybe it's even the smart play. But don't pretend it's anything else." Evelyn pulled her hand back. "So what's the alternative? We let the bank take everything? We watch the town starve? You die in this freezing house while I—" Her voice broke. "I can't just do nothing, Dad. I know." Marcus slumped back against his pillows, looking exhausted. "That's always been your problem. You've got too much of your mother in you, too damn stubborn to know when to quit." They sat in silence for a while. Outside, Evelyn could hear Red Hollow waking up, doors opening, voices calling to each other, the scrape of shovels against frozen ground. Normal sounds from a town that was pretending it wasn't dying. "If you do this," her father finally said, "you do it with your eyes open. Don't romanticize it. Don't tell yourself stories about how it'll all work out fine. You're trading your freedom for resources. That's the deal. And once you make it, there's no taking it back." "I know. Do you?" Marcus looked at her hard. Because I'm not sure you do. You're 23 years old, Evie. You should be thinking about a real marriage, a real life. Maybe kids someday with someone you actually chose, not— He gestured vaguely. Not this. That life was never going to happen anyway, Evelyn said quietly. Not here. Not with things the way they are. Her father didn't argue, which was its own kind of answer. The Red Hollow Inn was the nicest building in town, which wasn't saying much. It had 2 floors, a common room that doubled as a tavern, and exactly 6 guest rooms that smelled like damp wood and old tobacco. Evelyn pushed through the front door just after noon, her face numb from the cold and her stomach twisted into knots. The common room was nearly empty, just a few local men nursing drinks by the fire and pretending not to stare at her. Everyone in Red Hollow knew she'd had a visitor yesterday. Small towns didn't keep secrets, they fermented them. Evelyn, Sarah Holbrook, the innkeeper's wife, emerged from the kitchen with her professional smile fixed in place. What brings you by? I need to see Mr. Vane. The smile flickered. He's upstairs, room 4, but maybe— Evelyn was already heading for the stairs. She knocked on the door of room 4 before she could lose her nerve. There was a pause, then footsteps, and then Ryland Vane opened the door. He looked different in daylight, less like a nightmare and more like a man, though not a particularly safe one. He'd clearly just woken up. His hair was disheveled and he was shirtless under an open coat, revealing a chest covered in old scars that told stories Evelyn didn't want to know. Miss Mercer. If he was surprised to see her, it didn't show. Come in. Evelyn stepped past him into the small room. It was sparse, just a bed, a chair, a wash basin, but it felt crowded with him in it. Ryland closed the door and leaned against it, watching her with that same unnerving intensity from yesterday. I'll do it, Evelyn said before she could second-guess herself. I'll marry you, but I have conditions. Name them. First, you keep your promise about the debts and the supplies. All of it. And if my father needs better care than Doc Havering can provide, you get it for him. Agreed. Second, I want it in writing, a contract witnessed and legal. I'm not going into this based on a handshake. Smart, Ryland said. I'll have papers drawn up. Third, this was the hard one. I want to know why. Don't give me that political alliance nonsense. There are a dozen women who'd make better frontier ambassadors than me. So why do you actually want this marriage? Ryland was quiet for a moment. Then he pushed off the door and crossed to the window, looking out at Red Hollow's frozen main street. You don't remember me, he said. Evelyn frowned. Should I? 17 years ago, you were 6 years old. There was a beggar boy outside your father's trading post. Skinny kid, probably about 9, wearing clothes that didn't fit. You came out with half a loaf of bread and gave it to him. The memory was so old and faint that Evelyn wasn't even sure it was real, or if her brain was just filling in details. I gave bread to a lot of people back then. Dad used to let me hand out day-old food to anyone who needed it. This boy asked your name, Ryland continued, still not looking at her. You told him. Then you asked his. He said he didn't have one. Not one that mattered, anyway. And you said that was stupid. Everyone should have a name, so you'd call him Rye until he figured out a better one. Evelyn's breath caught. The boy lived in a work camp 20 miles from here, Ryland said quietly. Orphans and debtors, basically slaves. He'd run away that morning and walked through a blizzard to get to Red Hollow because he'd heard there was a trading post that sometimes hired help. But when he got there, he was too scared to go inside, so he just sat in the snow, trying to decide if he should go back to the camp or freeze to death right there on your doorstep. Rye, Evelyn whispered. Ryland finally turned to face her. You were the first person in my life who treated me like I was human instead of trash. You gave me food without asking questions. You smiled at me like I mattered, and then you went back inside and I never saw you again. Evelyn's mind was racing, trying to match the brutal Alpha in front of her with the memory of a scared boy in the snow. You came back for me because I was nice to you once, when we were kids? I came back, Ryland said, because you showed me what kindness looked like when I didn't think it existed, and because I've spent the last 15 years building enough power to make sure that when I did come back, I could offer you something real instead of just being another desperate person asking for charity. It was possibly the most insane thing Evelyn had ever heard. That's not, you can't base a marriage on a moment from 17 years ago. I was 6. I probably handed out bread to 50 people that winter. Maybe, but I was only one of them, and I remembered. Evelyn pressed her hands to her temples, trying to process this. This is crazy. You're talking about some kind of, childhood devotion? That's not real. That's not enough. I'm not talking about devotion, Ryland said calmly. I'm talking about a debt. You gave me something when you didn't have to. Now I'm returning the favor. Call it whatever you want, but that's why I'm here. And if I say no, then I leave. Red Hollow figures out its own survival, and you deal with your father's death however you need to. Ryland's expression didn't change. But you won't say no. You're too practical for that. He was right, and Evelyn hated him for it. When? She asked. 3 days. That'll give me time to get the contracts drawn up and make arrangements for the move north. North? Of course. The borderland territories where Ryland's fortress sat like a crown on the frozen mountains, miles from anything resembling civilization. Evelyn had never been that far north. Most people who went up there didn't come back. You'll be safe, Ryland said, reading her expression. I'm not bringing you to my territory to let anyone hurt you. What about you? The question slipped out before Evelyn could stop it. Are you going to hurt me? For the first time since she'd entered the room, something shifted in Ryland's face, something that might have been surprise, or maybe offense. No. Whatever else you think of me, Evelyn, I don't hurt people without cause. And you're not going to give me one. It wasn't exactly reassuring, but it was probably the best she was going to get. 3 days, Evelyn repeated. She felt numb, like she was standing outside her own body watching someone else agree to turn their life upside down. I'll need to arrange things here. Tell my father, figure out who can run the post. I'll take care of the post, Ryland said. You just focus on saying goodbye. Goodbye. Right. Because she was leaving Red Hollow, probably forever, to marry a man she didn't know and live in a place she'd only heard about in horror stories. This was fine. Everything was fine. Evelyn walked to the door on legs that felt like wood. She had her hand on the handle when Ryland spoke again. Evelyn. She looked back. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I know this isn't what you would have chosen, but I'll do everything I can to make sure you don't regret it. It should have been comforting. Instead, it just made Evelyn realize how completely and totally screwed she was. Red Hollow lost its collective mind. By the time Evelyn made it back to the trading post, half the town already knew she was marrying Ryland Vane. Sarah Holbrook had clearly wasted no time spreading the news, and small frontier towns turned gossip into a competitive sport. The reactions ranged from shock to outrage, to the kind of morbid fascination people usually reserved for public hangings. You're doing what? Mrs. Henderson, who'd skipped town without paying her tab, had apparently come back just to deliver her opinion. She cornered Evelyn outside the general store. Do you have any idea what kind of man he is? Do you have any idea that you still owe my father $40? Evelyn shot back. Mrs. Henderson's face went red. That's different. It's really not. The conversations got worse from there. Some people called her brave, others called her reckless. A few called her stupid. And old Tom Weatherby, who was drunk more often than not, loudly announced that she was a traitor for selling out to the northern savages. Evelyn stopped listening. She had 3 days to pack up her entire life, say goodbye to everything she'd ever known, and prepare to move into a world that might as well be on another planet. She didn't have time for everyone else's opinions. Her father took the news better than expected, probably because he'd already known she would say yes. He didn't argue, didn't try to talk her out of it, just pulled her into a hug that made her feel like she was 6 years old again. You write me, he said into her hair, every week. I want to know you're alive and that this bastard is treating you right. I will, Dad. And if he's not treating you right, you send word. I don't care how far north you are or how powerful his clan is. You're still my daughter. Evelyn held him tighter. I love you. Love you too, Evie. More than anything in this whole damn world. The next 2 days blurred together. Ryland's people showed up, serious-faced Northern Clan members who moved through Red Hollow like they owned it, which they basically did now. They delivered supplies, food, medicine, fuel, everything Ryland had promised. Doc Havering came back and brought a younger physician from Silverton, a specialist who examined Marcus and started him on treatments that probably cost more than the trading post was worth. And Ryland had the contracts drawn up, exactly as Evelyn had demanded. She read through them twice, had the town's retired lawyer read through them, and then signed her name at the bottom in ink that felt permanent as a scar. On the third day, the clan prepared to leave. Evelyn stood in the trading post, looking at the empty shelves and the freshly stocked storeroom, and tried to feel something other than numb. This place had been her whole life. Every memory, good or bad, had happened within these walls or within sight of them. And now she was leaving it behind for a man she barely knew and a future she couldn't imagine. Ready? Ryland stood in the doorway. He'd been mostly absent the past 2 days, letting his people handle the logistics while he stayed at the inn. But now he was here, dressed in heavy traveling furs and looking every inch the dangerous alpha everyone said he was. "No," Evelyn said honestly, "but I'm coming anyway." They rode out of Red Hollow at dawn. The clan traveled with military efficiency, about 30 people total, all armed, all moving like they'd made this journey 100 times before. Evelyn rode near the front, on a horse that was far better than anything she'd ever owned, wearing furs that probably cost more than her father's entire inventory. She looked back once. Red Hollow sat in the valley behind them, smoke rising from chimneys, looking small and fragile and impossibly far away already. Evelyn thought she saw her father standing outside the trading post, watching her leave, but the distance was too great to be sure. Then they crested the ridge, and the town disappeared behind them, swallowed by the winter wilderness. Ryland rode up beside her. "You all right? Does it matter?" "Yes." Evelyn glanced at him. His face was unreadable as always, but there was something in his eyes, concern, maybe, or guilt. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "Any of this. I've never been more than 20 miles from Red Hollow. I've never been married. I've never lived anywhere except my father's house. And now I'm supposed to just—" She gestured helplessly at the frozen wilderness ahead. "Figure it out?" "You'll figure it out," Ryland said. "You're tougher than you think." "How would you know?" "Because you survived Red Hollow, and that takes a particular kind of stubborn strength that most people don't have." It wasn't exactly a compliment, but coming from Ryland, it almost felt like one. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the crunch of snow under hooves and the wind moving through the pines. The temperature kept dropping as they climbed higher into the mountains. By midday, Evelyn's face hurt from the cold and her fingers had gone numb inside her gloves. "How much farther?" she asked when they stopped to rest the horses. 4 more days, Ryland said. "We'll camp tonight. Reach the first way station tomorrow." 4 days. 4 more days of riding through frozen hell before she reached whatever waited for her in the borderlands. Evelyn dismounted and immediately regretted it when her legs nearly buckled. Riding for hours in sub-zero weather turned out to be significantly harder than walking around Red Hollow. One of the clan members, a woman with gray-streaked hair and a face like weathered stone, handed her a canteen. "Drink," the woman ordered. "You're dehydrated." Evelyn drank. The water was so cold it hurt going down. "Thank you." "Kara." "Thank you, Kara." Kara studied her with the same assessing look that everyone in the clan seemed to have. "You're the Alpha's mate." It wasn't a question, but Evelyn answered anyway. "Apparently." "You don't sound certain. Would you be?" That got something that might have been a smile from Kara. "Fair point. But for what it's worth, Ryland doesn't make moves like this unless he's thought them through. So if he brought you north, he has a reason." "That's what I'm afraid of," Evelyn muttered. They made camp that night in a valley protected from the worst of the wind. The clan set up tents with practiced efficiency, built fires, posted guards. Evelyn sat near one of the fires, wrapped in furs, watching Ryland move through the camp giving orders. He was different here, more relaxed maybe, or at least more in his element. People deferred to him automatically, but there wasn't fear in it, just respect. These weren't subjects under a tyrant, they were warriors following their alpha. First time away from home? Evelyn looked up. A young man, maybe 19 or 20, sat down across from her. He had the same pale eyes as Ryland, but a friendlier face, and when he smiled, it looked genuine. "That obvious?" Evelyn asked. "Little bit. I'm Dane, by the way, Beta of the Western Patrol, and before you ask, yes, I'm one of Ryland's clan." No, we're not all scary. And yes, the fortress is exactly as cold as you've heard. Despite everything, Evelyn almost laughed. That's reassuring. Figured you could use some honesty. Dane poked at the fire with a stick. Most people tiptoe around the Alpha's mate like she's made of glass. But you don't look like glass to me. I'm not. Good, because glass doesn't last long where we're going. It should have been ominous, but Dane said it so matter-of-factly that it just felt true. Evelyn found herself relaxing slightly. What's it like? The borderlands, I mean. Is it as bad as people say? Depends on what people say. It's brutal, sure. The cold will kill you if you're careless, but it's also... Dane paused, searching for words. Honest. Nobody pretends to be something they're not up there. You survive or you don't, and everyone respects the ones who survive. And Ryland? What about him? Is he... Evelyn wasn't even sure what she was asking. Is he a good alpha? Dane considered that. He's a fair one. Hard, yeah, but not cruel. And he takes care of his people. There's not a person in this clan who wouldn't die for him if it came to it. Why? Because he'd do the same for us. Dane met her eyes. Look, I don't know what stories you heard in Red Hollow. Probably half of them are true. Ryland's done things that would make you sick if you knew the details. But he's also built something up there. A place where people can live without constantly looking over their shoulders. That counts for something. It was the longest conversation Evelyn had had about Ryland with anyone besides Ryland himself, and it left her more confused than before. Later, when most of the camp had bedded down for the night, Evelyn found herself unable to sleep. She sat by the dying fire, watching sparks drift up into the darkness, and tried to imagine what her life would look like a week from now. Can't sleep? Ryland emerged from the shadows and sat down beside her. He moved quietly for such a large man, one more thing that made him unnerving. Too cold, Evelyn lied. You're afraid. Yes. Ryland didn't tell her not to be, which she appreciated. The fortress isn't what you're expecting. And what am I expecting? Something out of a horror story. Torture chambers and blood on the walls and people screaming in the dungeons. He said it dryly, but there was an edge underneath. That's what the southern settlements think of us. That we're barbarians playing at civilization. Are you? Sometimes. Ryland looked at her. I won't lie to you, Evelyn. Life in the borderlands is harsh. People die from the cold, from starvation, from each other. I've made decisions that kept my clan alive and destroyed others. If you're looking for me to apologize for that, you'll be waiting a long time. I'm not asking you to apologize, Evelyn said. I'm asking you to be honest. You brought me into this because of some childhood memory and a political calculation. Fine. But if I'm going to survive whatever's coming, I need to know what I'm actually dealing with. Ryland was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out something small, wrapped in oiled cloth. He unwrapped it carefully and held it out. It was a piece of bread, preserved somehow, hard as a rock, but still recognizably bread. You kept it, Evelyn whispered. 17 years. Ryland looked at the bread like it was something holy. I told myself I was being stupid, that you probably didn't even remember, that basing anything on a moment of childhood kindness was insane. But every time I thought about letting go of it, I couldn't. Ryland, I don't expect you to love me, he interrupted. I don't even expect you to like me. But I need you to understand that when I made this decision, it wasn't casual. You're not just some political pawn. He stopped, seemed to struggle with the words. You're the reason I survived that first winter, and whether you remember it or not, that matters. Evelyn took the bread from him. It felt ancient in her hands, like an artifact from another age. What happens when we get to the fortress? You'll meet the clan. Some will hate you for being Southern. Some will test you to see if you're weak. And some will wait to see if you're worth following. And you? I'll be there, Ryland said simply. That's all I can promise. It wasn't enough. But somehow, sitting by the dying fire in the middle of the frozen wilderness, it felt like it might have to be. The fortress appeared on the 5th day like something carved from the mountain itself. Evelyn had been riding in a half-frozen daze when they crested the final ridge, and suddenly there it was, massive stone walls rising from the snow, watchtowers jutting into the gray sky, smoke from 100 fires creating a haze that hung over everything like a shroud. It wasn't beautiful, it was brutal and functional and utterly unforgiving, exactly like the land it dominated. "Welcome home," Ryland said beside her, and Evelyn couldn't tell if he was being sincere or ironic. The gates opened before they reached them, massive iron-reinforced wood that probably weighed more than her father's entire trading post. Guards lined the walls, real warriors, not the scattered militiamen Red Hollow called defenders. These people looked like they knew how to kill and had done it recently enough to remember the details. The clan rode through in formation, and Evelyn felt every eye on her. She kept her spine straight and her face neutral, the way she'd learned to do when angry customers came into the post looking for a fight. Don't show weakness, don't give them ammunition, just survive until you figure out the rules. The interior courtyard was chaos. People everywhere, warriors training, children running despite the cold, traders arguing over goods, blacksmiths hammering metal that threw sparks into the snow. It looked less like a fortress and more like a small city that happened to be built for war. "This way!" Ryland dismounted and held out a hand to help her down. Evelyn ignored it and dismounted herself, stumbling slightly when her numb legs hit the ground. Ryland's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. "Stubborn." "Consistent," Evelyn corrected. He led her through the fortress, and Evelyn tried to memorize the route, even though everything looked the same: stone corridors lit by torches, doorways leading to rooms she couldn't see into, staircases going up and down into darkness. They passed dozens of people, and every single one of them stopped to stare at her. "They're not used to outsiders," Ryland said, noticing her discomfort. "They're not used to you bringing home a wife." "That too." They climbed 3 flights of stairs and emerged into a corridor that was noticeably warmer and better lit than the rest. Ryland stopped at a heavy wooden door. "Your quarters." "Our quarters," Evelyn corrected automatically, then immediately wished she hadn't. Something flickered across Ryland's face. "The clan expects us to share space, but there are 2 rooms. You'll have privacy." He pushed open the door, and Evelyn stepped into what was apparently her new life. The main room was large, dominated by a fireplace that was already burning. Furs covered the floor and walls, and the furniture looked hand-carved but solid. A doorway on the left led to what looked like a bedroom, another on the right to a smaller room with a desk and shelves. It was nicer than anywhere Evelyn had ever lived, and it felt absolutely nothing like home. "It's not Red Hollow," Ryland said quietly. "No." Evelyn turned to face him. "When's the wedding?" "Tomorrow night. The clan needs to witness it to make it official." Tomorrow. She had 1 day to prepare for a ceremony that would permanently tie her to a man she'd known for less than a week. "What do I need to do?" "Survive the introduction." Ryland moved to the fire, adding another log, even though it didn't need it. He looked uncomfortable, which was somehow worse than when he looked dangerous. "The senior warriors will want to meet you, size you up. Some will be hostile." "How hostile?" "Depends on how well you handle yourself." He finally looked at her. "They'll test you, Evelyn. Push to see if you break. If you do, if you show weakness or fear, you'll spend the rest of your time here fighting for respect you'll never fully get. And if I don't break, then they might decide you're worth following." Evelyn laughed, a brittle sound. "No pressure." "I can't protect you from this," Ryland said, and for the first time she heard something that might have been regret in his voice. "If I intervene, it'll make things worse. They need to see you stand on your own." "Right, because that's what I'm known for. Standing up to warrior clans in frozen fortresses. You stood up to me." Ryland moved closer, and Evelyn fought the urge to step back. "In your father's shop. You had nothing, no power, no leverage, no reason to think you could negotiate, and you still demanded conditions. Still made me prove I was serious." He stopped just outside her personal space. "That's the woman they need to see tomorrow. Not someone trying to be brave, someone who is." "I'm terrified," Evelyn admitted. "Good. Terror keeps you sharp." Ryland turned toward the door. "Someone will bring dinner. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be brutal." He was gone before Evelyn could respond, leaving her alone in rooms that were supposed to be hers, but felt like they belonged to someone else entirely. She stood there for a long moment, listening to the fortress sounds drift through the walls. Voices, footsteps, the distant clang of metal on metal. Then she walked to the window and looked out at the mountains stretching endlessly in every direction, white and cold and completely alien. Somewhere far to the south, her father was probably sitting by the fire in the trading post, wondering if she was still alive. Evelyn pressed her forehead against the cold glass and tried not to think about how far she was from anything that made sense. The dinner arrived an hour later, brought by a young woman who looked about Evelyn's age but moved with the confidence of someone who'd been trained to fight. She set the tray down without a word, studied Evelyn with undisguised curiosity, and left. Evelyn ate mechanically, some kind of meat stew that was actually good, bread that was better than anything Red Hollow produced, water that tasted like it came straight from a mountain spring. Rich people food. Alpha's mate food. It sat heavy in her stomach. She was trying to figure out the sleeping arrangements when someone knocked. "It's open!" Evelyn called, expecting another servant. Instead, Kara walked in, the gray-haired woman from the journey north. She looked around the quarters with a critical eye, nodded once, and sat down in the chair by the fire without being invited. "You'll do," Kara said. Evelyn blinked. "Excuse me? I said you'll do. I wasn't sure when Ryland first brought you north. Thought maybe he was making a mistake, letting sentiment cloud his judgment. But I watched you during the ride. You didn't complain, didn't slow us down, didn't break." Kara leaned back. "So you'll do." "That's good?" Evelyn sat down across from her. "Are you here officially, or is—" "I'm here because I've known Ryland since he was 15 years old and dumb as a rock about everything except survival." Kara's expression softened slightly. "And because someone needs to tell you what you're actually walking into tomorrow. Ryland said the warriors would test me." "He's right, but he probably didn't tell you that some of them want you to fail." Kara held up a hand before Evelyn could respond. "Not because of you specifically, because you're Southern, because you're human, because Ryland bringing home a mate without consulting the senior council first was a calculated insult to their authority, and they're going to take it out on you since they can't take it out on him." Evelyn's stomach dropped. "Why would he do that?" "Because Ryland's been alpha for 8 years and he's still got something to prove. Taking a mate without permission shows he doesn't need their approval. Choosing someone from the settlements shows he's serious about the alliance he's been pushing. And picking you specifically—" Kara paused. "That's personal. Whatever his reasons, they matter enough that he's willing to gamble your safety on them." "That's insane. That's politics." Kara stood and walked to the window. "Look, I'm not telling you this to scare you. I'm telling you because you need to understand the game. Tomorrow, you'll meet Commander Theron, who runs the Eastern Territories. He'll be polite but cold. He wanted Ryland to marry his daughter. Then there's Magistrate Vex, who controls the trade guilds. She'll be friendly, but don't trust it. She wants access to southern supply routes, and she'll use you to get it if she can. Anyone I can actually trust? Me. Dane. You met him on the road. Maybe a handful of others." Kara turned back. "But mostly you trust yourself, and you trust that Ryland won't let anyone kill you. Everything else is variable." It was the most honest assessment Evelyn had gotten since leaving Red Hollow, and somehow that made it worse. "What about Ryland? Can I trust him?" Kara considered that. "He won't lie to you, he won't betray you, but he will sacrifice pieces of you if it means protecting the whole. That's what alphas do. They make impossible choices and live with the consequences." She moved toward the door. "The question isn't whether you can trust him, it's whether you can survive being trusted by him." After Kara left, Evelyn sat by the fire and tried to process everything. She'd known coming north would be difficult, but she'd imagined physical hardship, cold, hunger, isolation. She hadn't prepared for political warfare, for being a piece on a board she didn't understand, for having her every move scrutinized by people who wanted her to fail. The bedroom turned out to have an actual bed with clean sheets and more furs than any reasonable person needed. Evelyn lay down fully clothed, stared at the ceiling, and didn't sleep for hours. When she finally drifted off, she dreamed of Red Hollow, burning while she stood in the snow and couldn't move to stop it. Morning came too fast. Someone, probably the same silent young woman from yesterday, had left clothing outside the door. Not the practical frontier wear Evelyn was used to, but formal northern clan attire, A dress made of dark wool with silver threading, boots lined with fur, a heavy cloak that fastened with an intricate clasp shaped like a wolf's head. It was beautiful and completely impractical, and obviously meant to send a message about her new status. Evelyn put it on because she didn't have a choice, then stood in front of the small mirror and barely recognized herself. She looked like someone playing dress-up, a little girl in her mother's clothes pretending to be something she wasn't. "You look ready?" Evelyn spun. Ryland stood in the doorway, and she hadn't even heard him enter. He was dressed formally too, dark leather and fur that made him look even more dangerous than usual, if that was possible. "I look ridiculous," Evelyn said. "You look like my mate." Ryland crossed the room, which is exactly what they need to see. "Kara told me about the council, about Theron and Vex and everyone who wants me to fail." Of course she did. Ryland didn't sound surprised. "Kara's never been good at letting me make my own mistakes." "Is that what I am? A mistake?" "I don't know yet." The honesty was brutal, but somehow better than a lie would have been. "But I'm committed to finding out." There was a knock at the door, harder this time, more insistent. Ryland opened it to reveal Dane, looking unusually serious. "They're ready," Dane said. "Council chamber. Full assembly." Ryland nodded, then looked at Evelyn. "Last chance to run." "Where would I go?" "Fair point." He offered his arm. "Then let's go meet your new family." The council chamber was in the heart of the fortress, a massive room with a vaulted ceiling and a stone table that could seat 50 people. Today it was packed. Warriors lined the walls, senior clan members filled the chairs, and what looked like half the fortress population crowded the doorways trying to see inside. Every conversation stopped when Evelyn entered. Ryland guided her to the head of the table, where a chair had been left empty beside his. She sat, keeping her back straight and her hands still, even though she wanted to run screaming back to her quarters and never come out. "We begin," Ryland said, and his voice cut through the room like a blade. "As you know, I've taken a mate, Evelyn Mercer of Red Hollow. She stands before you not as a supplicant, but as my equal and your future leader. Those who wish to object may do so now." The silence that followed was deafening. Then a man stood from the middle of the table, tall, older, with scars that suggested a lifetime of violence. This had to be Theron. "With respect, Alpha," Theron said, and it didn't sound respectful at all. "Taking a mate without consulting this council is unprecedented. Doing so with a Southerner who has no experience with our ways is reckless. And expecting us to simply accept this decision without question is an insult to everything this clan has built." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Ryland's expression didn't change. "Your objection is noted. Anyone else?" A woman near the end of the table rose, younger than Theron, but with the same hard edge. "I speak for the trade guilds. We have concerns about the political implications of this union. The southern settlements have been our enemies for generations. How do we know this isn't some elaborate infiltration?" "You think I brought a spy into my fortress and made her my mate?" Ryland's tone was dangerous now. "You're welcome to that theory, Magistrate Vex. You're also welcome to prove it or keep your mouth shut." Vex sat down, but her eyes never left Evelyn. More objections followed, some political, some personal, all of them hostile. Evelyn sat through it, feeling every word like a physical blow. These people didn't just distrust her, they hated her for existing in a space they thought she hadn't earned. Finally, an older woman stood, ancient by frontier standards, probably 70 or 80, with white hair and eyes that looked like they'd seen everything twice. "Enough," she said, and everyone immediately went quiet. "I'm Elder Mora. I've sat on this council longer than most of you have been alive, and I've watched 5 alphas rise and fall, so when I say this is pointless posturing, you listen." Theron bristled. "Elder, we have legitimate concerns." "You have wounded pride," Mora interrupted. "Ryland didn't choose your daughter, so now you're throwing a tantrum disguised as politics." She turned to face Evelyn. "Girl, stand up." Evelyn stood, her legs shaking but her face hopefully calm. Mora studied her for a long moment. "Why did you agree to this?" The question was so direct it took Evelyn off guard. "To save my town, my father, to give people a chance to survive the winter." "So you sold yourself." "I made a trade," Evelyn corrected, "which is what everyone in this room does every day. The only difference is I'm being honest about it." Someone laughed, a short bark of surprise. Mora's lips twitched. "And now that you're here, what do you want?" "To survive," Evelyn said. "To not get killed by people who hate me for reasons I can't control. And maybe, if I'm lucky, to figure out how to make this work so nobody regrets it." "Honest answer." Mora looked around the room. She's scared but not broken. Smart enough to know she's out of her depth but stubborn enough to keep standing anyway. That's more than half of you showed when you first came north. She sat down. "The girl stays. Ryland made his choice. Now we live with it." The room erupted into argument, but Mora had effectively ended the debate. Whatever authority she held, it was enough to shut down the outright rebellion. Ryland stood. "The council is dismissed. The ceremony proceeds tonight at sundown. Anyone who wishes to attend may do so. Anyone who wishes to cause problems—" He let the threat hang unfinished. People filed out slowly, most of them still talking in angry clusters. Evelyn stood frozen at the head of the table, trying to process what had just happened. "You did well," Mora said, appearing at her elbow like a ghost. "Better than most would have in the same position." "I barely said anything." "You said enough." Mora's eyes were sharp despite her age. "And you didn't cry or beg or try to make them like you. That matters here. Strength matters. Everything else is negotiable." "Elder Mora, just Mora. I'm too old for titles." She patted Evelyn's arm. "Come find me tomorrow, after the ceremony, after you've survived the wedding night gossip and the morning after scrutiny. We'll talk about how you're actually going to lead these idiots." Then she was gone, leaving Evelyn alone with Ryland in the slowly emptying chamber. "That went better than expected," Ryland said. Evelyn laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. "Half the room wants me dead and the other half thinks I'm a spy. What would worse have looked like? Open assassination attempt." He wasn't joking. Evelyn sat down heavily. "I can't do this. I don't know how to be what they need. I'm a trader's daughter from a dying town. I've never led anyone. I don't understand clan politics or territory management or any of this. Neither did I when I became Alpha." Ryland sat beside her. "I was 22 years old, barely survived the challenge that killed my predecessor, and suddenly responsible for 3,000 people across 5 territories. I made mistakes, a lot of them. Some people died because of those mistakes. That's not reassuring. It's not meant to be." He looked at her. "I'm telling you that everyone in this fortress is figuring it out as they go. The only difference between success and failure is whether you keep moving forward when things get hard. And if I can't, then you fake it until you can." Ryland stood. "Get some rest. Tonight's ceremony will be brutal in different ways, and you'll need your energy." The ceremony was held in the main courtyard under a sky so clear the stars looked close enough to touch. The entire clan gathered, warriors, families, children, elders, everyone. They formed a massive circle around a central fire that burned high enough to feel like it was trying to reach the mountains. Evelyn stood at the edge of the circle, wearing the formal dress from earlier and a crown of winter flowers that someone had woven into her hair despite the cold. She felt like a sacrifice. Ryland stood across from her, dressed in ceremonial armor that looked ancient and probably was. Between them stood Elder Mora, holding a knife that gleamed in the firelight. "We gather to witness a union," Mora announced, her voice carrying across the silent courtyard. "2 lives becoming one, 2 paths merging, 2 souls bound by choice and necessity." The ceremony was nothing like the weddings Evelyn had seen in Red Hollow. There were no vows about love or devotion. Instead, Mora spoke about strength and survival, about the responsibility of leadership and the burden of power. She talked about how the clan was a living thing that needed to be fed and protected and sometimes bled for. Then she called them forward. Evelyn walked to the fire, very aware of hundreds of eyes watching her every step. Ryland met her there, his expression unreadable in the dancing light. "Your hand," Mora said to Evelyn. Evelyn held out her right hand. Mora took it, turned it palm up, and drew the knife across it in one quick motion. Blood welled immediately, bright and shocking against her pale skin. Before Evelyn could react, Mora did the same to Ryland's hand. "Blood to blood," Mora said. "Life to life." Ryland pressed his bleeding palm against Evelyn's. His hand was warm despite the cold, rough with calluses, and steady where hers was shaking. Their blood mixed and dripped into the snow at their feet. "By this act you are bound," Mora announced. "What was separate is now joined. What was weak alone is now strong together." The clan accepts this union and recognizes Evelyn Mercer as mate to Alpha Ryland Vane. The clan responded with a sound that was half cheer, half howl, primal and loud and utterly alien to everything Evelyn had known before. Ryland leaned close enough that only she could hear. "It's done. You're one of us now." Evelyn looked at their joined hands, at the blood still flowing between their palms, and wondered if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life, or somehow stumbled into the only chance she had at surviving. The celebration afterward was chaos. Someone produced drums and the courtyard filled with music, rhythmic, driving, nothing like the careful folk songs from Red Hollow. People danced, drank, fought playfully, and generally acted like they'd forgotten there had been a council meeting full of objections just hours earlier. Evelyn was pulled into the crowd, passed from person to person, each one offering congratulations or warnings or just drunken commentary. She lost track of names and faces, just tried to smile and nod and not get trampled. Dane found her eventually, drink in hand and grinning. "You survived." "Barely." Evelyn accepted the cup he offered and drank without thinking. Whatever it was burned going down and made her eyes water. "What is this?" "Clan whiskey, made from mountain herbs and regret." Dane laughed at her expression. "You get used to it. Usually takes about 3 cups." "I'm not having 3 cups." "Your loss." He leaned against the wall beside her, watching the chaos. "For what it's worth, you did good today. In the council chamber, I mean. Most people crack under that kind of pressure." "I was terrified." "Yeah, but you didn't show it. That's what matters." Dane's expression turned more serious. "Listen, I know this is all overwhelming, and I know half the clan still sees you as an outsider, but you've got people on your side. Me, Kara, Mora, even some of the warriors who objected earlier. They respect strength, and you showed them enough to make them think twice. Theron still hates me. Theron hates everyone. Don't take it personally." Dane pushed off the wall. "Come on, someone wants to meet you." He led her through the crowd to a quieter corner where a group of women sat around a smaller fire. They looked up as Evelyn approached, and she immediately felt like she was being evaluated again. "This is Lyra," Dane said, gesturing to a woman with dark hair and scars across her knuckles. "Head of the Southern Patrol, and that's Reese, who runs logistics. And Sarah, who... Actually, I'm not sure what Sarah does." "I keep everyone alive," Sarah said dryly. She was younger than the others, maybe 19, with a face that suggested she didn't smile often. "Someone has to." Lyra studied Evelyn for a moment, then nodded once. "You'll do." "That's what Kara said." "Kara's usually right." Lyra gestured to an empty spot. "Sit. We want to know if you're going to be useless or if we need to start actually respecting you." It was possibly the most honest welcome Evelyn had received all day. She sat. The conversation that followed was brutal in its directness. They asked about her skills. Could she fight? Could she track? Could she survive a week in the wilderness alone? Did she know anything about managing supply lines or dealing with trade disputes or handling clan politics? Evelyn answered honestly. No, probably not. Yes, maybe, and absolutely not." "So you're useless," Reese said, but she didn't sound particularly judgmental. "Currently," Evelyn agreed, "but I learn fast." "She'd have to," Sarah muttered. They talked for over an hour, and slowly Evelyn began to understand something crucial. These women weren't hostile because they hated her. They were hostile because they needed to know if she was going to be a liability. In a place where survival was constantly negotiated, weakness could kill everyone. "The fortress logistics are a mess," Reese said eventually. "We've got supply routes that overlap, warehouses that aren't properly inventoried, and trade agreements that contradict each other because nobody bothered to coordinate. I've been trying to fix it for months, but I don't have the authority to override the commanders." "But the Alpha's mate would," Lyra added, watching Evelyn carefully. Understanding clicked. "You want me to help reorganize the supply system, if you're capable." Reese leaned forward. "Look, most of us don't care that you're Southern or human or that Ryland brought you here without asking permission. We care whether you're going to make our lives easier or harder. The fortress has problems, real ones that are going to get people killed if they're not fixed. If you can help solve them, then you're useful. If you can't, she shrugged, then I'm just decoration. Essentially. It was possibly the most practical evaluation of her worth Evelyn had heard since arriving. Show me the logistics system tomorrow. I'll take a look. Reese's expression shifted. Not quite a smile, but close. Fair enough. The celebration lasted until well past midnight. By the time Evelyn made it back to her quarters, she was exhausted, slightly drunk, and more confused than ever about her place in this strange new world. Ryland was already there, standing by the window and looking out at the mountains. He'd removed the ceremonial armor and was back in his usual practical clothing. Eventful day, he said without turning around. That's one word for it. Evelyn sat by the fire and started working on the complicated fasteners of her dress. Your council hates me. Half your warriors think I'm useless. And apparently I'm now responsible for fixing your logistics system. Reese got to you. Ryland finally looked at her. She's been waiting for someone with enough authority to override Theron's territorial nonsense. Congratulations, you're now her political weapon. Should I be worried about that? Probably. But Reese is good at what she does, and if she thinks you can help, she's probably right. He moved away from the window. I'm taking the smaller room tonight. You should have the bed. You look like you're about to collapse. Evelyn was too tired to argue. Ryland? He paused in the doorway. Thank you, Evelyn said, for earlier, in the council chamber. You could have let them tear me apart. No, I couldn't. Something flickered across his face. You're my mate now. That means your enemies are my enemies, and anyone who threatens you threatens the clan's stability. He hesitated. Get some rest, Evelyn. Tomorrow, the real work begins. After he left, Evelyn sat alone by the fire and looked at the bandage wrapped around her palm where Mora had cut it. The blood oath, the binding ceremony, the permanent marking of her as belonging to this place and these people. She pulled out the piece of ancient bread Ryland had shown her, the one she'd given him 17 years ago when they were both children who didn't understand what they were giving or receiving. It still felt impossible that this entire situation had started with a moment of childhood kindness. But possible or not, here she was, married to a dangerous alpha, living in a frozen fortress, responsible for people who barely trusted her, and trying to figure out how to survive in a world that had no mercy for weakness. Evelyn wrapped the bread carefully and tucked it away. Then she went to bed and didn't dream of anything at all. Morning came with someone pounding on the door hard enough to rattle the frame. Evelyn jerked awake, disoriented and confused about where she was. Right, the fortress, her quarters, the morning after her wedding to a man who'd slept in a different room. Come in, she called, stumbling out of bed and grabbing a robe. She opened the door to find Reese standing there with an armful of ledgers and a grim expression. Good, you're up. We have work. It's barely dawn. Dawn was an hour ago. You're running late. Reese pushed past her into the room and dumped the ledgers on the table. These are the fortress supply records for the last 3 years. I need you to look through them and tell me if you see the same patterns I'm seeing. Evelyn blinked. Right now? Do you have somewhere more important to be? She didn't, actually. Ryland was already gone. She could hear him somewhere in the fortress below, his voice carrying through the stone as he gave orders about something. So Evelyn got dressed, made herself focus despite the headache from last night's whiskey, and sat down with the ledgers. 2 hours later, she understood why Reese looked so grim. These numbers don't make sense, Evelyn said, tracing a column with her finger. Look, the eastern warehouses are supposedly receiving supply shipments every 2 weeks, but the inventory levels stay basically static. Where's the food going? That's what I've been trying to figure out. Reese leaned over her shoulder. And it's not just food. Weapons, medicine, fuel, everything's disappearing somewhere between delivery and distribution. Someone's stealing it. That's my theory, but I can't prove it, and I don't have the authority to investigate the commanders who control those warehouses. Evelyn flipped through more pages, her merchant's daughter training kicking in automatically. She'd spent years helping her father track inventory and spot discrepancies in accounts. This was bigger and more complex, but the principles were the same. It's not just theft, she said slowly. Look at the timing. The discrepancies align with the supply convoy schedules. Someone's intercepting shipments before they reach the fortress and selling them elsewhere. Reese went very still. That's treason. That's business. Evelyn met her eyes. Expensive business with a death sentence attached, but still business. Which means there's a buyer. Someone outside the fortress who's willing to pay premium prices for stolen goods. The raiders, Reese said quietly. The ones who've been hitting the southern settlements. If they've got a supplier inside the fortress, then they've got unlimited access to weapons and supplies while the clan slowly starves. Evelyn sat back. We need to tell Ryland. We need proof first, because if you go to the Alpha with accusations like this and we're wrong, whoever we're accusing will make sure you disappear. And if we don't tell him and people keep dying? Reese didn't have an answer for that. They spent the rest of the morning building a case, cross-referencing supply records, mapping out the timing of raids against the timing of missing shipments, identifying which commanders had access to the warehouses in question. The pattern that emerged was damning. Commander Theron's eastern territories showed the largest discrepancies. He's not doing it personally, Evelyn said, staring at the evidence they'd compiled. He's too smart for that. But someone in his command structure is running the operation, and he either knows and is allowing it, or he's incompetent enough that he doesn't notice massive theft happening under his supervision. Either way, he's responsible. Reese looked nervous now, which was the first time Evelyn had seen her look anything other than confident. But accusing Theron. Evelyn, he's one of the most powerful people in the clan. He's got warriors who are personally loyal to him. If we do this wrong, we could start a civil war. If we don't do it at all, people die. People die anyway. That's how the borderlands work. Evelyn thought about Red Hollow, about watching her neighbors slowly starve while raiders grew bolder and supplies disappeared, about her father coughing himself to death because there wasn't enough medicine, about children freezing because fuel was too expensive. No, she said, not if I can stop it. Reese studied her for a long moment. You really believe that? That you can just fix things? Make them better? I have to. Evelyn gathered up the ledgers. Because if I don't believe that, then what the hell am I doing here? They found Ryland in the training yard, working through sword forms with a level of precision that made the movements look like a violent dance. He was shirtless despite the cold, his skin steaming in the frozen air, and every warrior in the yard had stopped their own training to watch. Alpha, Reese called from the edge of the yard. We need to speak with you, privately. Ryland drove his sword into the practice dummy hard enough that the wood split. Then he walked over, grabbing a towel someone handed him. My quarters, 10 minutes. They waited in the main room of Evelyn's quarters, while Ryland cleaned up. When he emerged, dressed and focused, Evelyn spread the ledgers across the table. Someone stealing from the fortress, she said without preamble. Supplies are being intercepted and sold to the raiders. Based on the records, it's been happening for at least 2 years, maybe longer, and the evidence points to someone in the Eastern Command. Ryland's expression didn't change. He sat down and started going through the ledgers, his eyes moving across the numbers with the same precision he'd shown with the sword. The silence stretched. Finally. Theron. His territories, Reese corrected quickly. We can't prove he's personally involved. He's involved. Ryland's voice was flat, either directly or through willful ignorance. Doesn't matter which, the result is the same. He looked at Evelyn. How sure are you about this? Very. The pattern's too consistent to be coincidence, and the timing matches too perfectly. And you're willing to stake your position on this accusation? Because once I act on it, there's no walking it back. If you're wrong, Theron will demand your exile or execution as recompense. If you're right but can't prove it publicly, same result. Evelyn felt her mouth go dry. She'd known there would be consequences, but execution hadn't been on her list of possibilities. I'm sure. Ryland studied her for another long moment, then nodded. All right, then we move carefully. He turned to Reese. I want a full audit of the eastern warehouses. Surprise inspection, starting tonight. Pull in people Theron doesn't control. Western Patrol, maybe some of Mora's people. Document everything. That'll tip him off, Reese warned. Good. Let him know we're looking. If he's smart, he'll go quiet and we'll catch whoever's actually running the operation. If he's not, Ryland smiled, and it wasn't pleasant. Then he'll panic and make mistakes. They spent the afternoon planning the logistics of the audit. Ryland was meticulous, considering every possible response and countermove. Watching him work, Evelyn began to understand how he'd risen to alpha position so young. He thought like a general and moved like a predator. "You're good at this," she said during a break while Reese went to gather supplies. "At what?" "Strategy. Chess with people's lives." "It's not chess." Ryland leaned back. "Chess has rules. This is just survival with extra steps." He looked at her. "You did well today. Finding this, building the case. Most people wouldn't have seen the pattern. I ran a trading post. You learn to track numbers or you go broke. It's more than that." Ryland's gaze was intense. "You could have ignored this, pretended you didn't see it, stayed safe and let someone else deal with the consequences. But you didn't. People are dying. People are always dying. That's not enough motivation for most." He stood and moved to the window, his favorite spot, apparently. "When I became Alpha, I had to execute 3 commanders who were embezzling supplies. Good warriors, loyal soldiers, but they were stealing from civilians to line their own pockets. I knew it would cause problems. I did it anyway. Because it was right. Because it was necessary." Ryland turned to face her. "Right and wrong don't mean much out here, Evelyn. What matters is whether the clan survives. That's the only metric that counts." That's a depressing way to look at the world. It's a realistic way. But something in his expression softened slightly. Though maybe having someone around who still believes in right and wrong isn't the worst thing. Before Evelyn could respond, someone knocked urgently. Dane burst in without waiting for permission. "We have a problem," he said. "The eastern warehouses. Someone's already emptied them." Ryland moved fast. Within minutes, he'd assembled a strike team and they were racing through the fortress toward the eastern sector. Evelyn followed despite Reese trying to pull her back. The warehouses were chaos when they arrived. The massive doors stood open and inside the storage rooms were stripped bare. Not a scrap of food, not a single weapon, nothing. "They knew," Reese said, staring at the empty shelves. "Someone warned them." Ryland's face was carved from stone. "Seal the fortress, no one in or out. I want every person who had access to these warehouses questioned. And find Theron now." But Theron was already there, emerging from the shadows with a dozen armed warriors behind him. "Looking for me, Alpha?" His voice was mocking. "Perhaps you should have thought about the consequences before sending your southern spy to root through private records." "Those records are clan property," Ryland said quietly, dangerously. "As are these supplies, which means you've been stealing from your own people. I've been trading with willing partners for the good of my territories." Theron drew his sword. "You've grown weak, Ryland. This girl," he gestured dismissively at Evelyn, "has you making emotional decisions instead of practical ones. The clan needs an alpha who puts strength first, not some lovesick boy chasing childhood fantasies." The insult hung in the air like smoke. "Stand down," Ryland ordered. "You're outnumbered and outmatched. Surrender now, and I'll make it quick." "I don't think so." Theron smiled. "You see, while you've been playing house with your new mate, I've been building alliances. The Eastern Territories answer to me now, and about half the fortress guards. So the question isn't whether I'm outnumbered, it's whether you're willing to start a civil war over a woman who's been here less than a week." Evelyn felt ice slide down her spine. This was her fault. She'd pushed the investigation, forced the confrontation, and now the entire fortress was on the edge of civil war. But Ryland didn't hesitate. "Dane, take Evelyn back to our quarters and guard her. Kara, sound the general alarm. Everyone else—" His voice rang out across the warehouse. "Choose now. Stand with me or stand against me, but choose fast." The next few minutes descended into chaos. Warriors poured into the warehouse from both sides. Theron's people moved to secure the exits while Ryland's forces tried to contain them. Evelyn was pulled back by Dane, but she kept watching as the situation spiraled toward violence. Then Elder Mora appeared. She walked into the center of the chaos with the kind of authority that made everyone stop mid-movement. Even Theron hesitated. "Enough," Mora said, her voice cutting through the tension. "Both of you, put away your weapons before you do something that breaks this clan beyond repair." "Stay out of this, old woman," Theron growled. "This is between me and the Alpha." "This is between you and your execution," Mora corrected sharply. "You've been caught red-handed stealing from the clan, and now you're attempting rebellion. The only question is whether Ryland kills you quickly or makes an example. The clan is with me. The The clan is with whoever keeps them alive, Mora interrupted. And right now, you're the one who's been selling their survival to raiders. So no, Theron, the clan is not with you. They're just afraid of what happens next. She turned to address the gathered warriors. I've lived through 4 civil wars. They all started like this. 2 leaders, both convinced they were right, neither willing to back down until enough blood was spilled to prove a point. And you know what happened every time? The clan got weaker. We lost territory. People died. And afterwards, whoever survived had to rebuild from ruins. The room was absolutely silent. So here's what's going to happen, Mora continued. Theron, you're going to surrender yourself for trial. Your warriors will stand down, and Ryland will guarantee your people won't be punished for following orders they thought were legitimate. And if I refuse, Theron demanded. Then we fight, Ryland said quietly, and I guarantee you won't like how that ends. For a long moment, no one moved. Then slowly, Theron lowered his sword. This isn't over, he said to Ryland. You've chosen weakness over strength, and it's going to destroy you. Maybe, Ryland agreed, but I'll still be alive to see it. You won't. Theron was taken into custody, along with 3 of his officers who'd been directly involved in the supply theft. His warriors were disarmed but not imprisoned. Mora's compromise held. Evelyn stood in this warehouse long after everyone else had left, looking at the empty shelves and trying to process what had almost happened. You should be celebrating, Kara said, appearing beside her. You found the corruption, stopped the theft, probably saved dozens of lives. I almost started a war. You exposed a problem that would have started a war eventually anyway. Kara put a hand on her shoulder. The difference is now it's out in the open where it can be dealt with, instead of festering in the dark until it explodes. Theron's warriors, they'll hate me now. Some of them. Others will respect you for having the spine to act when you saw something wrong. Kara squeezed her shoulder. Welcome to leadership, girl. It never feels good, and you're always wondering if you made the right call. But you did what needed doing, and that's more than most manage. That night, Evelyn sat in her quarters while the fortress slowly settled back into uneasy peace. Ryland came in late, looking exhausted. How bad is it? Evelyn asked. Theron's facing execution. His officers will be exiled. The Eastern Territories need new leadership, which is going to be a political nightmare. He sat down heavily. But the supply theft is stopped, and the evidence was clear enough that most of the clan understands why it had to be done. I'm sorry. Don't be. Ryland looked at her. You did exactly what I brought you here to do. You saw a problem and fixed it. That's what the clan needs. Someone who won't ignore the hard truths because dealing with them is uncomfortable. Even if it almost tears the fortress apart. The fortress was already broken. You just forced everyone to see it. He leaned back. Theron was right about one thing, though. I have gotten soft. The old me would have executed him the moment I saw the evidence. Wouldn't have bothered with trials or compromises or political maneuvering. Why didn't you? Ryland was quiet for a moment. Because you were watching, and I wanted you to see that there's another way to lead besides just cutting down anyone who disagrees with you. The admission hung between them, vulnerable and unexpected. I don't know if I'm worth that, Evelyn said softly. Neither do I yet. Ryland stood. But I'm committed to finding out. He went to the smaller room again, leaving Evelyn alone with her thoughts and the weight of everything that had happened. She'd been at the fortress less than 3 days and had already exposed treason, nearly triggered a civil war, and forced the execution of one of the most powerful commanders in the clan. And tomorrow she'd have to figure out how to actually lead the people who now either respected her or hated her, with no middle ground and no room for mistakes. Evelyn looked at the bandage on her palm, where Mora had cut her during the ceremony. Blood to blood, life to life. She was bound to this place now, for better or worse. And somewhere in the frozen fortress beneath her, secrets she hadn't even begun to uncover were waiting to destroy everything she was trying to build. The execution was scheduled for dawn, 3 days after Theron's arrest. Evelyn woke to the sound of hammers on wood, the construction crew building the platform in the main courtyard where Theron would die. The sound echoed through the fortress like a heartbeat, steady and inevitable, and it made her stomach turn. She dressed quickly and found Ryland already gone. Again. He'd been disappearing before sunrise every morning since the arrest, dealing with the political aftermath and the restructuring of the Eastern Territories. They'd barely spoken except in official capacities. Her as his mate at council meetings, him as Alpha making pronouncements she was expected to support. The distance felt intentional, like he was giving her space to process everything that had happened. Or maybe he just didn't know what to say to her anymore. Evelyn made her way down to the kitchens, hoping to grab something to eat before the fortress woke up completely. Instead, she found chaos. Supplies were scattered everywhere. Cooks were arguing in multiple languages, and someone had apparently dropped an entire crate of eggs on the stone floor. "What happened?" Evelyn asked one of the kitchen workers. The woman looked up, face flushed with frustration. "The supply shipment from the Western Territories. Half of it was spoiled. Rotten meat, moldy grain, vegetables frozen solid and ruined. We don't have enough food to feed everyone today, let alone for the rest of the week." "Where's the head cook?" "Dealing with the council. They're trying to figure out rationing." Evelyn surveyed the chaos and made a decision she'd probably regret. "All right, everyone stop yelling and listen." Her voice cut through the noise and people actually turned to look at her. "How much edible food do we have right now?" The woman consulted a clipboard. "Maybe enough for one meal if we stretch it thin, 2 if we cut portions." "What about the storage cellars, the emergency supplies?" "Those are sealed. Only the Alpha can authorize." "I'm authorizing it." Evelyn ignored the shocked looks. "Open the emergency stores, feed everyone a full meal today. Then send runners to the Southern Territories. Tell them we need an emergency shipment within 48 hours, or people start going hungry. The Alpha should make that call." "The Alpha is busy preparing for an execution and managing a political crisis," Evelyn interrupted. "I'm making the call. If he disagrees, he can override me later. But right now, people need to eat." She waited for someone to argue. Instead, the head cook, a massive woman with flour in her hair, nodded once. "You heard her. Move." The kitchen erupted into organized activity. Evelyn helped where she could, mostly staying out of the way while people who actually knew what they were doing solved problems. But the fact that they'd listened to her, that they'd accepted her authority without question, felt significant in ways she didn't fully understand yet. By the time breakfast was served, the fortress was buzzing with the news. The Alpha's mate had opened the emergency supplies without permission and ordered food from the southern settlements like she had the authority to negotiate trade agreements. Evelyn was in her quarters, trying to figure out if she'd just committed career suicide, when Ryland walked in. "You opened the sealed stores," he said without preamble. "We didn't have enough food. People were going to go hungry. Those supplies are for siege situations, emergencies that threaten the entire fortress. People starving seemed like an emergency to me." Evelyn met his eyes, refusing to back down. "If I overstepped, tell me now. But I'm not going to apologize for making sure the clan gets fed." Ryland studied her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled, a real one that reached his eyes and made him look years younger. "You're learning." "Learning what?" "How to lead." He crossed to the window, his usual spot. "Half the fortress is talking about how you took charge in the kitchens this morning. The other half is arguing about whether you had the right to do it, but all of them are watching to see what happens next." "And what does happen next?" "I back your decision publicly," Ryland said. "Make it clear that you acted with my full authority and that anyone questioning your judgment is questioning mine. Then we deal with whatever political fallout comes from you ordering supplies from the southern settlements without consulting the Trade Council." Evelyn's stomach sank. "There's going to be fallout." "Definitely. Magistrate Vex controls all southern trade agreements. She's going to be furious that you went around her." He turned to face her. "But she's also practical. If the supplies arrive and the price is reasonable, she'll accept it because the alternative is admitting she would have let people go hungry to protect her authority." "That's a gamble." "Everything's a gamble." Ryland moved toward the door. "The execution is in 2 hours. You should be there. The clan needs to see us united." "I don't want to watch someone die." "Neither do I, but that's the cost of leadership." He paused in the doorway. Theron made his choice when he stole from the clan. What happens next is just consequences. After he left, Evelyn sat alone and tried to reconcile the man who just smiled at her with the one who was about to execute someone in front of hundreds of witnesses. The contradiction made her head hurt. The courtyard was packed when Evelyn arrived. Every member of the clan who could walk had crammed into the space. along with representatives from the outer territories who'd traveled specifically to witness Theron's death. The platform stood in the center, crude but functional, with a single wooden block and restraints already in place. Evelyn took her position beside Ryland at the front of the crowd. He was dressed in full ceremonial armor again, every inch the Alpha, and he didn't look at her or acknowledge her presence. This was performance, showing the clan that justice was being served, that betrayal had consequences, that strength still mattered. Theron was brought out in chains. He looked smaller than Evelyn remembered, diminished by captivity and the certainty of death. But when he saw Ryland, something ugly and defiant flashed across his face. "Any last words?" Ryland asked, his voice carrying across the silent courtyard. Theron spat on the ground. "You're making a mistake. She's going to destroy you, destroy all of us. You chose sentiment over strength, and the clan will pay for it long after I'm dead." "Maybe," Ryland agreed, "but you won't be alive to see it." He drew his sword. Evelyn looked away at the last moment, but she couldn't block out the sound. The sharp, final noise of metal meeting flesh, the collective exhale of the crowd, the heavy thud of something hitting the platform. When she forced herself to look back, it was over. Theron's body lay crumpled and still, and Ryland was cleaning his blade with mechanical precision. "Justice is served," Elder Mora announced to the crowd. "The traitor is dead. The clan survives." The crowd dispersed slowly, quietly, like people leaving a funeral instead of an execution. Evelyn stood frozen, trying to process what she'd just witnessed. She'd known intellectually that Ryland was capable of violence. The stories about him made that clear, but seeing it was different. He'd killed Theron without hesitation, without visible emotion, like it was just another task to check off a list. "You all right?" Kara appeared beside her. "No," Evelyn said honestly, "but I don't think I'm supposed to be." "Probably not." Kara guided her away from the platform where workers were already cleaning up. "First execution? First everything." Evelyn's hands were shaking. "Is it always like this?" "Sometimes worse." Theron got a clean death because Ryland still respected him as a warrior. Others? Kara shook her head. "Let's just say you're lucky you didn't see some of the earlier ones." They were walking through the fortress corridors when alarms started blaring. The sound was different from the General Assembly bell, sharper, more urgent, designed to cut through stone and distance and confusion. Warriors immediately started running toward their posts, and civilians began herding children toward the interior rooms. "What's happening?" Evelyn shouted over the noise. "Attack alarm," Kara said, already drawing her weapon. "Stay close to me." They ran toward the command center, a fortified room near the top of the main tower. Ryland was already there, still in his blood-spattered armor, studying reports coming in from the wall guards. "Status," he barked as they entered. "Armed force approaching from the north," Dane reported. "Maybe 200 fighters moving fast. They'll be at the gates in less than 10 minutes. "Raiders?" "Worse." Dane's face was grim. "It's Magnus Draven." The name meant nothing to Evelyn, but everyone else in the room reacted like he'd announced the end of the world. Ryland's expression went absolutely flat, the look of someone calculating impossible odds. "Who's Magnus Draven?" Evelyn asked. "My war brother," Ryland said quietly. "Or he was, before I became Alpha. I thought he'd accepted it. Apparently I was wrong. He's challenging you. He's trying to kill me and take the fortress." Ryland turned to his commanders. "Full defensive positions, seal the lower gates, get archers on the walls, and evacuate all non-combatants to the interior sections. This is going to get ugly." The next hour was controlled chaos. Evelyn found herself swept up in the evacuation efforts, helping move children and elderly clan members into the reinforced interior rooms that could be sealed from the inside. The fortress had clearly been designed with sieges in mind. Thick walls, multiple defensive layers, supplies cached throughout the structure. "Why is he doing this now?" Evelyn asked Reese as they worked to secure one of the storage rooms. "Right after Theron's execution? Because the clan is divided," Reese said grimly. "Theron's supporters are angry, the Eastern Territories don't have proper leadership yet, and everyone's still processing the fact that you exist. Magnus is betting that Ryland won't have the support he needs to fight off a serious challenge." "Will he?" "Depends on how many people decide you're worth dying for." That was a terrifying answer. By the time Evelyn made it back to the command center, Magnus's forces had reached the fortress. She could see them from the tower window. Warriors in mismatched armor, some carrying clan banners she recognized, and others flying symbols that looked like they'd been borrowed from a dozen different territories.
"He's united the rival packs," Ryland said, standing at the window beside her. "Every alpha who resented my leadership, every warrior who thought I was too young or too soft or too willing to work with the southern settlements. Magnus promised them a return to the old ways, pure strength, no compromises, no alliances with humans. So this is about me. This is about power." Ryland's jaw was tight. "You're just the excuse he's using to justify it."
Magnus himself appeared at the head of the army, a massive man with a scarred face and the kind of presence that made people step back even from a distance. He rode right up to the gates and stopped, making no move to attack yet. "Ryland Vane!" he shouted, his voice carrying across the walls. "Come out and face me, or admit you've gone so soft that you hide behind stone and your human pet while real warriors handle the fighting." The insult was clearly designed to provoke. Evelyn saw Ryland's hand tighten on his sword, saw the muscle in his jaw jump, but he didn't move. "You're not going out there," she said. "I might have to." "That's suicide. He's got 200 fighters, and I'm the alpha." Ryland finally looked at her. "If I refuse his challenge, I lose the respect of everyone in this fortress. They'll see me as a coward who lets others fight his battles. Magnus knows that. He's betting I'll choose honor over strategy." "Then choose strategy," Evelyn said urgently. "Honor won't mean anything if you're dead. Neither will leadership." Before Evelyn could argue further, Elder Mora entered the command center, moving faster than Evelyn had seen her move before. "Don't even think about it," she told Ryland. "Going out there is exactly what he wants." "I can't just ignore a direct challenge." "Yes, you can. Because this isn't a duel, it's a rebellion. Magnus isn't here for single combat. He's here to take the fortress and kill everyone who stands against him. So stop pretending this is about honor and start treating it like the war it actually is." Ryland was quiet for a moment. Then he turned to Dane. "How long can we hold against a siege?" "Weeks if we're careful with supplies. Months if we ration hard and the emergency stores hold out." "Magnus doesn't have months," Ryland said, thinking out loud. "He's got rival packs working together, which means fragile alliances and limited trust. The longer this drags out, the more likely his coalition falls apart." He turned to the commanders. "We wait him out. Fortify the defenses, conserve resources, and let Magnus waste his energy trying to crack a fortress that's survived worse than him." "He'll try to draw you out," Mora warned. "Probably, but I'm not taking the bait." Ryland's expression was hard. "Let him scream at the gates. Let him call me a coward. None of it matters if the clan survives." It was the right strategic decision. Evelyn knew that. But watching Ryland stand at the window while Magnus hurled insults and challenges at him, she could see the cost. Every accusation of cowardice, every mockery of his leadership, every claim that he'd grown weak because of her. It all landed like physical blows. The siege began in earnest at nightfall. Magnus's forces tried to scale the walls, but the fortress defenses held. Archers picked off climbers, boiling oil poured from murder holes, and the massive gates resisted every attempt to ram them open. By midnight, Magnus had lost maybe 20 fighters and gained nothing except confirmation that the fortress wouldn't fall easily. But he had other strategies. The fires started in the outer settlements just before dawn, the small villages and trading posts that existed under the fortress's protection but outside its walls. Evelyn watched from the tower as flames consumed buildings she'd never seen, as people she'd never met ran screaming into the darkness while Magnus's warriors cut them down. "He's trying to force us out," Dane said quietly. "Make us choose between protecting civilians and holding the fortress." Ryland's face was carved from stone. "How many people are out there?" "Maybe 300. Mostly farmers, traders, families with children." "Can we get them inside?" "Not without opening the gates, which would let Magnus's forces pour in." It was an impossible choice. The kind of decision that had no good answer. Save the civilians and risk losing the fortress. Protect the fortress and watch innocent people die. Evelyn saw Ryland's hand tighten on the window ledge until his knuckles went white. "There has to be another way," she said. "There isn't." Ryland's voice was flat. "This is what Magnus does. He makes you choose between bad options and then uses your choice to prove you're unfit to lead. He turned away from the window. The fortress holds, that's the decision. Those are people. I know what they are. Ryland's eyes were haunted. But if I open those gates, everyone dies. At least this way, most of us survive. He walked out of the command center, leaving Evelyn alone with Dane and the sound of screaming from outside the walls. He's right, Dane said quietly. It's the only call that makes sense. That doesn't make it easier. No, it just makes it necessary. Evelyn stood at the window and watched the settlements burn. She thought about Red Hollow, about her father, about all the small, desperate towns scattered across the frontier that lived on the edge of survival. Those people down there weren't warriors or politicians. They were just trying to make it through another winter without starving or freezing or getting killed by raiders. And Ryland was letting them die because the math said it was the smart play. She found him later in their quarters, sitting in the dark and staring at nothing. I made the right call, he said without looking at her. I know. Then why do you look like you hate me? I don't hate you. Evelyn sat down across from him. I understand why you did it. I even agree it was the only strategic option. But understanding doesn't make it easier to watch people burn. You think I don't know that? Ryland's voice was rough. You think I don't hear them screaming? That I won't remember every face I couldn't save? He finally looked at her. This is what you signed up for, Evelyn. This is what leadership actually costs. Not the ceremony or the politics or the supply logistics. This. Making choices that destroy you while you're making them, but have to be made anyway. I'm starting to figure that out. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the distant sounds of the siege, shouts from the walls, the occasional clash of weapons, the ever-present crackle of fires that hadn't been put out yet. Magnus sent a message, Ryland said eventually. He's offering terms. What kind of terms? Surrender the fortress and he'll let most of the clan live. Step down as Alpha and he'll make it quick. Ryland's smile was bitter. And if I hand you over to him, he'll consider letting my key supporters go into exile instead of executing them. Evelyn felt ice slide through her veins. Me specifically? You specifically. Because you're the symbol of everything he thinks is wrong with my leadership. The human influence, the Southern Alliance, the compromise with weakness. Ryland leaned forward. He's betting I'll choose you over the clan, that I'll sacrifice strategic advantage to keep you safe. And will you? I don't know. The honesty was brutal. 3 weeks ago, the answer would have been easy. The clan comes first, always. But now, he stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. You're making it complicated. I'm sorry. Don't be. Complicated might be what we need. Ryland stood and moved to the window. But it doesn't change the immediate problem. Magnus has us trapped. He's willing to burn everything outside these walls to prove a point. And eventually, he's going to find a weakness in our defenses that we can't cover. So what do? We survive tonight. Then we figure out tomorrow. But tomorrow came with worse news. Evelyn woke to shouting in the corridors and the sound of boots running on stone. She dressed quickly and found the fortress in chaos. Warriors racing toward the eastern section, civilians being evacuated again, and an acrid smell of smoke that shouldn't have been inside the walls. She found Ryland in the eastern corridor, where a section of the fortress was actively burning. Someone opened the water gates, Kara was saying, soot-streaked and furious. Let Magnus's people into the lower levels. By the time we realized what was happening, they'd already set fires in 3 different sections. How many got in? Ryland demanded. Maybe 40. We've contained most of them, but they're spread out through the fortress now. It's going to take hours to hunt them all down. Theron's supporters, Ryland said quietly. They're still loyal to him even after his execution. Or they hate me enough that they'd rather burn the fortress than see me keep it. It was a nightmare scenario. The fortress under siege from outside while fighting insurgents inside. Evelyn watched Ryland make decisions rapid fire, deploying warriors to hunt down the infiltrators while maintaining enough defenders on the walls to prevent Magnus from using the chaos to launch a full assault. I need you to do something, Ryland said to Evelyn, pulling her aside while commanders scrambled to follow his orders. What? Take the non-combatants deeper into the fortress. There's a series of old mining tunnels beneath the foundation. They're not on any official maps, but they're large enough to hold everyone who can't fight.
If the fortress falls, those tunnels lead out to the canyon system. It's a rough path, but people can make it to the southern settlements if they move fast.
You're planning an evacuation. I'm planning for the worst. Ryland's eyes were shadowed. Magnus is inside the walls now. Even if we root out the infiltrators, he knows we're vulnerable. He's going to push hard, and I'm not certain we can hold. Then surrender. I can't, because Magnus isn't going to honor any terms he offers. He'll kill everyone anyway, just to make sure there's no resistance later. Ryland gripped her shoulders. So I need you to save whoever you can. Get them into those tunnels. Keep them quiet and safe. And if you hear that the fortress has fallen, you run. You don't come back for me. You don't try to be a hero. You just run, and you keep running until you're somewhere Magnus can't reach. I'm not leaving you. Yes, you are. Because you're the future of this clan, Evelyn. Even if I die, even if the fortress falls, as long as you survive, there's still a chance to rebuild. He pulled her close, and for the first time since she'd known him, Ryland looked genuinely afraid. Please, I'm asking you to do the one thing I can't, save the people I'm going to fail. Evelyn wanted to argue, wanted to tell him they'd figure out another way, wanted to believe this wasn't happening. But the fortress was burning and people were dying, and Ryland was asking her to do the impossible. Where are the tunnels? She asked. He told her. The next hours blurred into controlled chaos. Evelyn worked with Reese and a handful of others to evacuate everyone who couldn't fight. Children, elderly, wounded, anyone who'd slow down the defense. They moved through the fortress in small groups, trying to avoid the sections where fighting was still happening, listening to the sounds of combat echo through the stone corridors. The entrance to the mining tunnels was exactly where Ryland said it would be. A hidden door in the oldest part of the fortress that opened onto a steep staircase descending into darkness. Evelyn stood at the top and looked down at the refugees crowding into the shadows. How far do these go? Someone asked nervously. Far enough, Evelyn lied, because she had no idea, and admitting that would cause panic. She was helping the last group into the tunnels when the alarm bells changed pitch, the signal for a full breach. Magnus had broken through somewhere, his forces were inside the fortress proper, and the fighting was no longer containable. Go, Evelyn told Reese, who was staying behind to seal the tunnel entrance. Get them out, I'm going back. Ryland said, I don't care what Ryland said. Evelyn checked the knife she'd been carrying since the journey north, inadequate for real fighting, but better than nothing. I'm not abandoning him. She ran back through the fortress, following the sounds of combat. Warriors were fighting in the corridors now, the organized defense breaking down into desperate skirmishes. Bodies littered the ground, some in clan colors, some wearing Magnus's symbols, all of them dead or dying. Evelyn found the main battle in the central courtyard where Theron had been executed that morning. Magnus's forces had taken the gates and were pouring through, overwhelming the defenders by sheer numbers. And in the center of the chaos, Ryland was fighting Magnus himself. They moved like they'd trained together for years, probably had, back when they were war brothers. But now that partnership was twisted into something lethal. Magnus was bigger and maybe stronger, but Ryland was faster and definitely angrier. They crashed together like storms, weapons moving too fast to follow, each strike designed to kill. Evelyn started to move toward them, but Kara grabbed her arm. Don't, Kara said. You'll just distract him. I can't just watch. Yes, you can, because that's all any of us can do right now. So Evelyn watched as Ryland and Magnus destroyed each other. She watched as Ryland took a blow to the ribs that should have dropped him, but didn't. She watched as Magnus stumbled on the blood-slick stones and barely recovered in time to block a strike that would have taken his head off. And she watched as Magnus, seeing an opening, went for Evelyn instead of Ryland. He moved impossibly fast, breaking away from the fight and charging toward where she stood frozen at the edge of the courtyard. Evelyn had maybe 2 seconds to realize she was about to die, to see the murder in Magnus's eyes, to understand that he'd never intended to fight fair. Then Ryland was between them. He took the blow meant for Evelyn, Magnus's sword driving through the gap in his armor and into his side with a sound that Evelyn would hear in nightmares for the rest of her life. But even wounded, Ryland didn't stop. He grabbed Magnus's weapon arm, trapped it, and drove his own blade up under Magnus's ribs with brutal precision. Magnus made a choking sound and tried to pull away, but Ryland held him close like a terrible embrace. "You lost the moment you touched her," Ryland said quietly, and then he twisted the blade. Magnus collapsed, blood spreading across the stones in a pool that caught the firelight like scattered rubies. He tried to speak, but only blood came out. Then his eyes went empty, and he was just another body among the dozens littering the courtyard. Ryland stood over him for a moment, swaying slightly, blood soaking through his armor from the wound in his side. Then he turned to face Magnus's army. "Your leader is dead," he announced, his voice somehow carrying despite the pain he had to be in. "You can keep fighting and die here, or you can surrender and live. Choose now." The fighting didn't stop immediately. Violence had momentum that took time to bleed off, but slowly, gradually, Magnus's forces began lowering their weapons. Without their alpha, without the unifying force that had brought them together, the coalition started to fracture. Evelyn ran to Ryland as he collapsed. "I'm fine," he said, which was an obvious lie given the amount of blood. "You're not fine, you're—" Evelyn pressed her hands against the wound, trying to slow the bleeding. "Someone get a physician." "The tunnels," Ryland said, gripping her arm. "Did you?" "They're safe. Everyone who couldn't fight is safe." She looked at the carnage around them, the burning sections of fortress, the bodies, the exhausted warriors trying to process what had just happened. "We held. You held." "We held," Ryland agreed. Then his eyes rolled back and he passed out in her arms. The aftermath was worse than the battle. Ryland survived. The wound was serious but not fatal, and the fortress physicians managed to stop the bleeding and stitch him back together. But dozens of others didn't survive. The final count was 73 dead, another 100 wounded, and sections of the fortress so damaged they'd take months to repair. Magnus's coalition fell apart without him. Some warriors surrendered and were allowed to return to their territories. Others fled into the wilderness and became someone else's problem. A few tried to continue the rebellion and were dealt with the same way Theron had been. Evelyn spent 3 days helping coordinate the recovery efforts while Ryland was unconscious. She worked with Mora to organize food distribution, with Reese to assess structural damage, with Kara to integrate the refugees who'd hidden in the tunnels back into fortress life. People listened to her now, not because they liked her or agreed with her, but because she'd proven she'd stay when things got hard. On the 4th day, Ryland woke up. Evelyn was sitting beside his bed, reviewing supply requests, when his eyes opened. "You're still here," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "Where else would I be?" "The tunnels, running south. Anywhere but in a half-destroyed fortress with an alpha who nearly got you killed." Evelyn set down the papers. "You took a sword meant for me. I'm pretty sure that's the opposite of getting me killed. I also created the situation that put you in danger in the first place." Ryland tried to sit up and immediately regretted it, wincing. "Magnus was right about one thing. I've made choices lately that put sentiment ahead of strategy." "You mean you've started treating people like they matter instead of just being pieces on a board?" "Same thing." "It's really not." Evelyn helped him adjust the pillows so he could sit without tearing his stitches. "Ryland, you spent 15 years building power so you could come back for some girl who gave you bread when you were 9. That's not strategy. That's the most sentimental thing I've ever heard." He almost smiled. "When you put it that way, it does sound ridiculous. It sounds human." She reached out and took his hand, the first time she'd voluntarily touched him beyond formal requirements. "You don't have to be just the ruthless alpha or just the sentimental boy who saved a piece of bread for 17 years. You can be both." Ryland looked at their joined hands. Magnus would have said, "That makes me weak." Magnus is dead, so maybe his opinion on strength isn't worth much. That did get a smile, small but real. They sat in silence for a while, just existing in the same space without the weight of crisis or performance between them. Outside, the fortress was slowly repairing itself. Hammers on stone, voices calling orders, life returning to something like normal. "I found something," Ryland said eventually. "After the battle, when we were securing Magnus's camp. Letters, dozens of them, going back months. He'd been planning this since before I brought you north. So I really was just an excuse. You were the final piece he needed to convince the other alphas that I'd gone soft. But he would have found another excuse if you hadn't existed." Ryland's grip on her hand tightened slightly. "Evelyn, I need you to understand something. The life I'm offering you, it's not going to get easier. There will be more Magnuses, more rebellions, more impossible choices, and I can't promise to keep you safe from all of it."
"I don't need you to keep me safe," Evelyn said. "I need you to trust me to stand beside you when things get hard. That's the deal we actually made, even if neither of us said it out loud." "That's a terrible deal for you." "Probably, but it's the one I'm choosing anyway." Ryland studied her face like he was trying to memorize it. "I never expected this." "What?"
To actually, he stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. "When I came to Red Hollow, I thought I was fulfilling an old debt, returning a favor from someone who'd shown me kindness when I had nothing. I didn't expect to find someone who'd actually fight beside me instead of just standing behind me. Is that your way of saying you like having me around? It's my way of saying I'm starting to need you around, which is terrifying for entirely different reasons." Evelyn laughed despite everything. The exhaustion, the grief, the overwhelming reality of what they'd just survived. "Welcome to marriage, I guess, where everything is terrifying and you just have to keep going anyway. Worst sales pitch ever. And yet here we are." Ryland pulled her closer, careful of his injury, but deliberate. "Here we are," he agreed softly. And for the first time since leaving Red Hollow, Evelyn thought maybe she could actually do this. Not because it was easy or safe or anything close to what she'd imagined, but because she'd stopped imagining and started living it instead. The fortress would rebuild, the clan would heal, and somewhere in the middle of all the chaos and violence and impossible choices, she'd found something she hadn't been looking for. A partnership that was messy and complicated and built on foundations that shouldn't work but somehow did anyway. It wasn't the life she'd chosen, but maybe it was the life that had been choosing her all along. Ryland was back on his feet within 2 weeks, moving through the fortress like the injury had never happened, even though Evelyn knew he was still in pain. She'd catch him wincing when he thought no one was looking, pressing a hand to his side when the stitches pulled. But he refused to show weakness while the clan was still recovering from Magnus's attack, so he pushed through it with the same stubborn determination that had probably kept him alive this long. The fortress itself was healing slower than its alpha. Entire sections remained unusable. Walls stood half-collapsed, and the scorch marks from the fires weren't coming out no matter how much scrubbing happened. But people were rebuilding, sometimes literally, with hammers and mortar, sometimes just by showing up to work each day despite exhaustion and grief. Evelyn was in the repaired supply warehouse checking inventory with Reese when a messenger arrived from Red Hollow. Her hands shook as she broke the seal on the letter. She hadn't heard from her father in over a month, and the silence had been eating at her despite everything else demanding her attention. "My dear Evie," the letter began in her father's familiar scrawl, "I hope this finds you well and still breathing, which I understand is not guaranteed in your new circumstances. The trading post is doing surprisingly well thanks to the silver your husband provided. We've restocked, hired help, and I'm actually sleeping through the night without coughing myself awake. Doc Havering says I might even see spring, though he's been wrong before. Red Hollow survived the worst of winter, and people are talking about you like you're some kind of frontier legend, which would be funny if it wasn't so terrifying. Please write back so I know you're alive. Your loving father, Marcus." Evelyn read it twice, relief and homesickness hitting her in equal measure. Her father was alive. Red Hollow had made it. The gamble she'd taken by marrying Ryland had actually worked. "Good news?" Reese asked, watching her face. "My father's doing better. The town survived." "Then it was worth it." Evelyn looked up sharply. "What?" "Everything you gave up to come here." Reese gestured around the warehouse. "This place, this life, the danger and the politics and nearly getting killed during a siege, you did it to save your town, and it worked. So it was worth it." "I'm not sure it's that simple." "It never is." Reese returned to checking crates. "But sometimes things work out anyway, despite all the reasons they shouldn't." Evelyn was still thinking about that when another messenger arrived, this one looking significantly more worried. "Alpha's mate," the young warrior said, slightly out of breath. "You're needed in the council chamber, now." The council chamber was packed when Evelyn arrived, and the atmosphere was tense enough to cut. Ryland stood at the head of the table with a map spread in front of him, and everyone else was arguing over it in at least 3 different languages. "What's happening?" Evelyn asked Kara quietly. "Red Hollow's burning," Kara said. "Raiders hit it 2 days ago. The settlement's asking for help."
Evelyn felt her stomach drop. My father... We don't know. The messenger got out before the worst of it, but the situation's bad.
She pushed through the crowd to the table. The map showed Red Hollow and the surrounding territories, with markers indicating raider movements. Someone had drawn estimated casualty numbers in the margins, and they were high enough to make Evelyn's vision swim. We have to send help, she said to Ryland. We can't. His voice was flat, alpha cold, the tone that meant he'd already made a decision and wasn't interested in arguments. The fortress is still recovering. We don't have the warriors to spare, and we can't afford another fight this soon after Magnus. Those are people. I know what they are. Ryland's eyes were hard. But I have 3,000 people here depending on me to keep them alive. I can't sacrifice their safety for a southern settlement that isn't even part of our territory. Red Hollow is the reason we have an alliance at all, Evelyn shot back. It's my home. My father is there. And I'm sorry about that, but the answer is still no. The room went silent. Every person there was watching to see what would happen next, whether the Alpha's mate would defer to the Alpha's judgment, or whether this was about to become a public fight that would undermine both of them. Evelyn took a breath and made a choice that probably qualified as treason. Then I'm going alone. Ryland's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. No, you're not. You don't get to tell me what I can and can't do. Evelyn held his gaze. I came here to save Red Hollow. If the only way to do that now is to go back and help defend it myself, then that's what I'm doing. You'll die. You have no military training, no combat experience. I know, but I'm going anyway. She turned to address the room. Anyone who wants to come with me, meet at the south gate in an hour. We leave whether it's 2 people or 200. She walked out before Ryland could stop her, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break her ribs. In their quarters, Evelyn started gathering supplies. Warm clothes, what little food she could carry, the knife that had become a permanent fixture at her belt. She was checking her pack when Ryland came in. That was stupid, he said. Probably. You undermined my authority in front of the entire council. I know. And you're still planning to go? Yes. Evelyn turned to face him. Ryland, I understand you have to think about the clan first. I even agree with the logic. But my father is in Red Hollow, and I can't sit here safe in the fortress while he burns. I won't survive that, not the way you need me to. Ryland was quiet for a long moment. Then he crossed to the desk and pulled out a map, spreading it across the surface. The direct route to Red Hollow takes 4 days, but there's a canyon pass that cuts through the mountains, faster but more dangerous. You could make it in 2 days if you push hard. Evelyn stared at him. You're helping me? I'm making sure you don't die doing something monumentally stupid. He marked the route with quick, precise movements. The pass is narrow, easy to defend, hard to attack. If you get trapped, hold the high ground. And these markers show water sources and potential shelter points. Why are you doing this? Ryland looked at her, and for the first time since they'd met, he looked genuinely uncertain. Because you're right. Red Hollow is the foundation of our alliance, and letting it burn sends a message that we don't protect our allies. And because... He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. Because I remember what it's like to have nothing and nowhere to go. I won't make you watch your home die if there's any chance of saving it. Evelyn felt something crack open in her chest. Come with me. I can't. The fortress needs to see that you keep your promises, that the alliance matters, that you meant it when you said the southern settlements were under your protection. She moved closer. And I need to know I'm not doing this alone. Ryland studied her face, then he turned and shouted through the open door. Dane, get in here. Dane appeared within seconds, looking curious and slightly concerned. Alpha? Assemble a strike force, 50 warriors, fast movers, supplies for a week. We're going to Red Hollow. Dane's eyebrows shot up. The council's not going to like that. The council can handle the fortress for a few days without me. Move. After Dane left, Ryland turned back to Evelyn. This is probably a mistake. Definitely a mistake, she agreed, but we're doing it anyway. Apparently, something that might have been a smile crossed his face. You're a terrible influence. You say that like it's a bad thing. They rode out an hour later with 53 warriors, more than Ryland had planned because word spread fast and people volunteered. Not because they cared about Red Hollow, Evelyn realized, but because they'd follow their Alpha into fire if he asked. The canyon pass was everything Ryland had warned about. Narrow paths with deadly drops, ice that made the horses stumble, wind that cut through every layer of clothing. But they made good time, pushing through exhaustion and cold, because stopping meant letting people die. Evelyn rode near the front beside Ryland, and for the first time since leaving Red Hollow months ago, she felt like she was moving toward something instead of just running away. "Tell me about him," Ryland said on the second day, when they'd stopped to rest the horses. "Who?" "Your father. You're risking everything to save him. I should probably know why." Evelyn thought about how to explain Marcus Mercer to someone who'd grown up in work camps and survived through violence. He's stubborn and terrible at business. He kept the trading post open years after he should have closed it, just because he believed Red Hollow deserved to survive. He gave away more food than he sold, hired people nobody else would employ, and went broke doing it. And when I told him I was marrying you to save the town, he tried to talk me out of it because he didn't want his last act to be trading his daughter like property. He sounds impractical. He is, but he's also the reason I know how to see people as people instead of just problems to solve. She looked at Ryland. "You asked me once why I gave bread to that boy outside the trading post. It's because my father taught me that sometimes keeping someone alive matters more than keeping the ledger balanced." Ryland was quiet for a moment. "I'd like to meet him. If he survives?" "He'll survive. He's too stubborn to die before giving you a piece of his mind about how you've been treating me." "That's fair." They reached Red Hollow at dawn on the third day, and the scene was worse than the messenger had described. Half the town was burned to the ground. Bodies littered the streets, some from the initial raid, others from people who'd tried to flee and been cut down. The trading post was still standing, but heavily damaged, and there were raiders camped in the town square like they owned the place. "How many?" Ryland asked Dane, who'd scouted ahead. "Maybe 60 fighters. Armed but not organized. These are opportunists, not soldiers. They hit the town, took what they wanted, and now they're celebrating." "Survivors?" "Hiding in the buildings that are still standing. Your father-in-law barricaded himself in the trading post with about 20 others. They're alive but won't be for long if those raiders decide to finish the job." Evelyn felt relief so intense it made her dizzy. "We get them out first, then we deal with the raiders." "Other way around," Ryland corrected. "We can't evacuate people while there's an active threat. We eliminate the raiders, then secure the survivors." "That'll take too long." "It'll take as long as it takes." Ryland's tone left no room for argument. "Dane, split the force. Half with me for the direct assault, half with Kara for flanking. Evelyn, I'm coming with you." "You're staying back with the reserves." "The hell I am." They stared at each other, and Evelyn could see Ryland calculating. Whether ordering her to stay would work, whether making it a public argument would undermine him worse than letting her fight would. "Stay behind me," he finally said. "You get into trouble, you run. Understood?" "Understood." The attack was fast and brutal. Ryland's forces hit the raiders from two sides simultaneously, catching them drunk and unprepared. The fighting was ugly, close quarters, lots of blood, people screaming and dying in ways that would haunt Evelyn's dreams. But it was also effective. Within 20 minutes, most of the raiders were dead or running, and the clan warriors had secured the square. Evelyn ran for the trading post before the fighting was fully over. She pounded on the barricaded door. "Dad, it's me! Open up!" There was a long pause. Then the sound of furniture being moved and the door cracked open to reveal her father's face, older and thinner than she remembered, but alive. "Evie?" Marcus stared at her like she was a ghost. "What are you? How did you?" She hugged him so hard his ribs probably creaked. "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" I'm fine. He hugged her back just as fiercely. "Though I'm pretty sure I'm hallucinating because my daughter just showed up with what looks like a small army." "Long story." Evelyn pulled back to look at him properly. He looked better than he had when she'd left. The treatments Ryland had paid for had clearly worked, but he also looked exhausted and scared, which made sense given he'd just spent days under siege. Behind her, Ryland appeared in the doorway. "Marcus Mercer?" Her father's expression shifted, going from relief to something harder and more assessing. "You're Vane." "I am." You're the reason my daughter's been living in a frozen fortress, getting attacked by rebels and nearly killed in sieges." "Also true." Marcus studied Ryland for a long moment. "You taking care of her?" "Trying to. She makes it difficult." "That sounds like Evie." Her father's expression softened slightly. "Thank you for bringing her home, even if it's probably too late." "It's not too late," Evelyn said firmly. "We're going to rebuild. All of it." "With what?" Marcus gestured at the destroyed town. "Evie, there's nothing left. Most of the supplies are gone, half the buildings are rubble, and the people—" His voice cracked. "We lost 42 people in the raids, including the Henderson family. All of them." Evelyn felt the weight of that settle over her. 42 people. In a town that only had a few hundred to begin with, that was catastrophic. "Then we rebuild with what's left," she said. "We clear the rubble, repair what can be fixed, and start over." "You're talking like you're staying." "I am staying, at least until Red Hollow is stable again." Ryland made a noise that might have been protest, but when Evelyn looked at him, he just shook his head. "We'll talk about it later." They spent the rest of the day securing Red Hollow, treating wounded, putting out fires that were still smoldering, gathering the survivors together so they could figure out who'd made it and who hadn't. The clan warriors worked alongside the townspeople without complaint, and slowly the immediate crisis started to ease. By nightfall, they'd set up a command center in the trading post. Ryland was going over supply inventories with Dane when Magistrate Vex arrived. Apparently word had spread fast, because she'd ridden up from Silverton with a small contingent and enough trade goods to make a difference. She surveyed the damaged town with a practiced eye, then turned to Ryland. "Bold move, Alpha," she said, "coming to the defense of a southern settlement when your own fortress is still recovering." "Red Hollow is part of our alliance," Ryland said. "We protect our own." Interesting definition of our own. But Vex looked more calculating than critical. "Still, it's good politics. The southern settlements have been watching to see if you'd actually honor your commitments. This answers that question definitively." "I didn't do it for politics." "No, you did it for her." Vex glanced at Evelyn. "Which is even better from a strategic standpoint. Nothing convinces people like genuine sentiment." The conversation continued, Vex negotiating supply agreements, Ryland outlining a defensive plan to prevent future raids, both of them speaking in the language of alliance building that Evelyn was slowly learning to understand. But underneath all the political maneuvering, something real was happening. Red Hollow wasn't just being saved, it was being integrated into a larger network of protection and trade that might actually work. Later that night, Evelyn found Ryland standing outside the trading post, looking at the burned sections of town. "You're staying," he said without turning around. "Just for a few weeks, until things are stable. The fortress needs you." The fortress has Mora and Kara and Reese. Red Hollow has nobody except frightened people who just watched their town nearly die. She moved to stand beside him. "I have to do this, Ryland. These are my people." "I thought the clan was your people now." "They are. Both things can be true." She took his hand. "Come back for me when Red Hollow is standing again. I'll be here." Ryland's grip tightened. "What if more raiders come? What if I leave and something happens and I'm not here to—" "Then I'll handle it. The same way I've been handling things since I got to the fortress." She turned to face him fully. "You taught me that leadership means making impossible choices. Well, this is mine. Staying here, rebuilding, proving that the alliance actually means something beyond just politics and trade agreements." "You're asking me to leave you in a barely defended town in the middle of winter after it's already been attacked once?" "Yes." "That's insane." "Probably, but you're going to let me do it anyway." Ryland looked at her for a long moment. Then he pulled something from inside his coat, an envelope sealed with wax. "I wrote this 3 days after we got married, before Theron's betrayal, before Magnus's attack. I was going to burn it, but—" He pressed it into her hands. "Don't open it unless something happens to me, but keep it, just in case." Evelyn held the letter carefully, feeling the weight of whatever words were inside. "Nothing's going to happen to you." "You don't know that." "Neither do you." They stood in the cold, holding on to each other, both of them pretending this wasn't goodbye, even though it obviously was. Ryland's forces left the next morning, taking the most critically wounded Red Hollow survivors with them. The fortress had better medical facilities, and leaving them in town was essentially a death sentence. Evelyn watched them ride away, Ryland at the head of the column, and tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. Then she turned back to Red Hollow and got to work. The next 3 weeks were the hardest of Evelyn's life. Every morning brought new problems: supply shortages, structural failures, people breaking down from trauma and exhaustion. She worked alongside everyone else, clearing rubble and rebuilding walls and distributing food, learning through trial and error what it meant to actually lead people through crisis. Her father helped where he could, though he was still weak. "You've changed," he said one evening while they were sorting through salvaged supplies. "Is that good or bad?" "Just different. You're harder now, more certain." He paused. "But you're also more yourself, if that makes sense. Like you figured out who you actually are instead of who you thought you should be." Evelyn thought about that, about the girl who'd agreed to marry a stranger to save her town, about everything that had happened since, about the person she was becoming in the space between two worlds. "I'm still figuring it out. Aren't we all?" The letter from Ryland arrived on the 21st day. Evelyn recognized his handwriting on the outside, but it wasn't addressed to her. It was addressed to the Red Hollow Council. Inside was a formal agreement. The fortress would provide ongoing protection and trade support in exchange for Red Hollow serving as a southern anchor point for the Alliance. Supplies, warriors, regular patrols, everything the town needed to not just survive but actually rebuild into something stable. At the bottom, in smaller writing, "Tell Evelyn I'm coming back for her in 2 weeks. She should be ready to leave. RV." Evelyn laughed despite herself. He was still trying to give her orders, even from a distance, but she also felt something settle in her chest. Relief, maybe, or just the knowledge that she hadn't been abandoned, that the Alliance was real, and she was part of something larger than just survival. Red Hollow was far from recovered when Ryland returned, but it was standing. Buildings had been repaired, supplies restocked, and the people had started to look less like survivors and more like a community that might actually have a future. Ryland rode in with just a small escort this time: Dane, Kara, and a handful of others. He dismounted in the town square and looked around, assessing the changes with the same intensity he brought to everything. "You've been busy," he said to Evelyn. "Had to be. The place was falling apart. And now? Now it's stable, not perfect, but stable." She gestured to the rebuilt sections. "The southern settlements have agreed to the Alliance terms. Magistrate Vex worked out trade agreements with 3 neighboring towns, and my father's actually turning a profit for the first time in years." "So you succeeded." "We succeeded." Evelyn stepped closer. "The Alliance works because you showed up when it mattered. People trust it now in a way they didn't before." Ryland reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture so casual and unexpectedly tender that it made Evelyn's breath catch. "I kept my promise." "You did. And now you're coming back with me." It wasn't a question, but Evelyn answered anyway. "Yes, Red Hollow can stand on its own now, and the fortress—" She paused, realizing something. "The fortress feels like home too. Both places do. That's going to make things complicated. Everything about us is complicated. At this point, it's basically a theme." Ryland smiled, one of his rare genuine ones that transformed his entire face. "Fair point." They stayed in Red Hollow 2 more days, finalizing agreements and making sure the transition would hold. Evelyn said goodbye to her father, who hugged her tight and told her to write more often and not to let her husband turn her into someone she wasn't. "I think it's too late for that," Evelyn said. "Good. You were too soft before anyway." "That's a terrible thing to say to your daughter." "It's an honest thing. There's a difference." Marcus pulled back to look at her. "I'm proud of you, Evie, for all of it. The marriage, the fortress, coming back here when you didn't have to. You turned out better than I ever imagined. I learned from the best. Damn right you did." The ride back to the fortress felt different from the ride south. Evelyn wasn't running toward crisis anymore. She was returning to a place she'd earned her position in through blood and stubbornness and a lot of mistakes. The warriors who rode with them treated her like one of their own now, and when they stopped to camp, people included her in conversations instead of talking around her. "You're actually clan now," Dane said on the 3rd night. "That's rare for outsiders." "What changed?" "You stopped trying to be what you thought we wanted and just started being useful. Turns out that's what actually matters."
It was possibly the most succinct summary of the last few months Evelyn had heard. They reached the fortress on the 5th day, and Evelyn was surprised by how much it felt like coming home. The massive walls, the organized chaos of the courtyards, even the cold, all of it felt familiar in ways Red Hollow had stopped feeling. The greeting they received was warmer than expected. People stopped work to acknowledge Ryland's return, and several warriors actually nodded respectfully at Evelyn. Elder Mora met them at the inner gates with her usual sharp-eyed assessment. "You came back," Mora said to Evelyn. "Did you think I wouldn't?" "Wasn't sure. You had an easy escape. Stay in Red Hollow, let Ryland handle the fortress politics, live a simpler life. Most people would have taken it." "I'm not most people." "Clearly." Mora smiled slightly. "Welcome home, girl. Try not to start any rebellions while I'm napping." That night, in their quarters that felt less foreign than they used to, Evelyn finally opened the sealed letter Ryland had given her weeks ago in Red Hollow. The handwriting was his, careful and deliberate, and the message was short enough to fit on a single page. "Evelyn, if you're reading this, I'm dead and you're trying to figure out what comes next. Don't mourn me longer than necessary. I've lived longer than I probably deserved anyway. The clan is yours now, along with whatever authority I built. Mora will guide you through the political transitions. Dane and Kara will handle military matters. Trust them. Trust yourself. And remember that everything I built so you'd have something worth protecting when I was gone. You showed me kindness when I was nobody. This is me returning the favor. Ryland, P.S. If she is happy without me, I will survive that too." The postscript hit her like a physical blow. All this time, all the power he'd accumulated, all the decisions he'd made, it had all been building toward giving her a choice, not trapping her in a marriage or forcing her into a role, but creating a situation where she could actually thrive whether he was part of it or not. It was the most selfless and heartbreaking thing Evelyn had ever read. She found Ryland in the main room, working through reports like he hadn't just spent 5 days riding through frozen wilderness. He looked up when she entered, saw the letter in her hand, and his expression went carefully neutral. "You weren't supposed to open that unless I was dead," he said. "I know." Evelyn set the letter on the table between them. "When did you write it?" "About a week after we got married, right after I realized you were going to make everything I'd planned significantly more complicated." "The postscript," her voice caught. "You really meant that? That you'd be okay if I was happy without you?" Ryland was quiet for a long moment. "I spent 15 years convincing myself that bringing you north was about fulfilling a debt, returning a kindness, building an alliance, all very practical reasons." He stood and moved closer. "But the truth is, I've been in love with you since I was 9 years old, and you gave bread to a starving boy who nobody else saw. And I've always known, that loving someone doesn't give you the right to own them. So yes, if you'd been happier in Red Hollow, if you'd chosen to stay, I would have survived that. Because your happiness matters more than my feelings." Evelyn felt tears burning behind her eyes. "That's the most insane and wonderful thing anyone's ever said to me. It's just true. It's not just anything." She closed the distance between them. "Ryland, I came back because the fortress is home now. Because the clan is my people, and this life, however complicated and dangerous and exhausting, is the one I want. Not because I owe you, not because of duty or alliance or any practical reason. Because I'm choosing it, choosing you." Something shifted in Ryland's expression. Surprise and hope and vulnerability all mixed together. "You don't have to. I'm not saying it because I have to. I'm saying it because it's true." She took his hand, the same way she had during the blood oath ceremony months ago. "We started this as a transaction. Survival traded for protection. But somewhere along the way it became something else. And I'm tired of pretending it's still just practical." Ryland pulled her close, careful of old injuries but deliberate. "What is it then?" "I don't know. Something new. Something we're building as we go." Evelyn looked up at him. "Is that enough?" "It's everything," Ryland said quietly. And then he kissed her, the first real kiss they'd shared, built on months of partnership and crisis and slowly learning to trust each other with the truth. When they finally pulled apart, Evelyn was laughing and crying and feeling more certain than she'd felt about anything in months.
This doesn't solve any of our actual problems, she pointed out. Probably makes them worse, actually. Definitely worse. But we're doing it anyway? Apparently, Evelyn agreed, and standing in quarters that finally felt like home, with a man she'd married as a transaction and slowly fallen in love with through survival and stubbornness, Evelyn thought maybe they'd actually figured something out. Not the easy way or the safe way, but a way forward that belonged to both of them. The fortress still had problems, the alliance was still fragile, and there would be more crises, more impossible choices, more nights wondering if they'd survive until morning. But for the first time since leaving Red Hollow in the dead of winter, Evelyn wasn't just surviving. She was living, building, becoming someone who could carry the weight of leadership without being crushed by it. And she wasn't doing it alone anymore. Spring came to the borderlands like an apology, slow and uncertain, as if the world wasn't quite sure it had permission to thaw. Evelyn stood on the fortress walls watching ice melt from the mountains, creating rivers where there had been only frozen stillness for months. The air still bit cold, but there was something different underneath now. Something that felt like possibility. 6 months had passed since Magnus's death. 6 months of rebuilding walls and redistributing power and learning how to lead people who'd spent generations trusting only strength. The fortress looked different now, cleaner, more organized, less like a military outpost and more like a place where people actually lived instead of just survived. But the real changes were harder to see from the outside. "You're thinking too loud," Ryland said, appearing beside her with 2 cups of something that smelled like herbs and optimism. "I can hear it from 3 rooms away." Evelyn accepted the cup. "I'm thinking about the Southern Summit next week, whether we're actually ready for it. We're not, but we're doing it anyway." He leaned against the wall close enough that their shoulders touched. "Magistrate Vex confirmed this morning every major settlement from here to Silverton is sending representatives. This is what we've been working toward. Or it's where everything falls apart because we tried to build something impossible." Also possible, Ryland sipped his drink. But falling apart would at least be interesting. 6 months ago, that comment would have sounded cynical. Now Evelyn recognized it for what it was. Ryland's way of admitting he was nervous without actually saying the words. Some things about him hadn't changed, probably never would. But she'd learned to read the spaces between what he said and what he meant. The Southern Summit had been Evelyn's idea, proposed during a council meeting where everyone was arguing about trade routes and territorial boundaries for the 100th time. "What if we just got everyone in the same room?" she'd suggested. "All the settlements, all the clan territories, everyone with a stake in whether this alliance actually works. Put it all on the table and figure out what we're actually building here." The council had looked at her like she'd suggested setting the fortress on fire for entertainment. But Elder Mora had smiled that sharp, knowing smile and said, "The girl has a point. Can't build an empire on assumptions and half agreements. Time to see if this thing is real or just political theater." So now, in 1 week, representatives from 15 different settlements and 4 clan territories would descend on the fortress to negotiate the terms of something that didn't have a name yet, but felt important enough to risk everything for. "Your father's coming," Ryland said, breaking into her thoughts. "I know. I got his letter yesterday. Marcus had written to say he'd be representing Red Hollow at the summit, and that he was bringing enough opinions to fill a wagon and enough stubbornness to make sure they're heard, which was very on brand for him. Are you ready for that? Having him here, seeing how things actually work?" Evelyn considered the question. "I think so. He knows what I signed up for. And he's been getting my letters. He knows it's been hard, but seeing it is different from reading about it. He might try to take you home. He might try, but I'm not going." She looked at Ryland. "This is home now. Both places are. I'm tired of choosing between them." "That's the whole point of the alliance," Ryland said quietly. "Not choosing. Building something where both worlds can exist together without one destroying the other." It was the most idealistic thing Evelyn had ever heard him say, and it made her chest ache with the weight of what they were attempting. Because it wasn't just about trade agreements or defensive pacts. It was about fundamentally changing how people saw each other, convincing warriors and settlers that they could be stronger together than apart, and doing it all while dealing with the reality that most of them still didn't trust each other. The week before the summit was controlled chaos. Rooms were prepared, supplies organized, security protocols established. Reese worked herself into exhaustion, making sure the logistics would hold. Kara drilled the warriors on how to be intimidating but not threatening, which was apparently a very fine line. And Dane spent 3 days arguing with the kitchen staff about whether serving Southern-style food would be seen as welcoming or patronizing. Evelyn was in the middle of reviewing the seating arrangements, trying to figure out how to arrange people so nobody ended up sitting next to someone whose family they'd killed, when a messenger arrived from the Eastern Territories. The new Eastern commander, a woman named Lysa, who'd risen through the ranks after Theron's execution, was bringing news. And based on the messenger's expression, it wasn't good news. Evelyn found Ryland in the training yard, working through sword forms with an intensity that suggested he was working through something else entirely. She waited until he finished the sequence before speaking. "We have a problem." Ryland didn't lower his sword. "How bad?" "The Eastern settlements are refusing to attend the summit. Lysa says they don't trust that this isn't just a trap to consolidate your power over territories that used to be independent. They think I'm using the alliance as a cover for expansion." Essentially, Ryland drove his sword into the practice dummy hard enough that the wood cracked. "They're not entirely wrong. The alliance does give us more control over territories we didn't have access to before. But that's not why we're doing this, isn't it?" He pulled the sword free and finally looked at her. "Evelyn, I'm not going to pretend this is pure altruism. Yes, the alliance helps people survive, but it also strengthens our position, extends our influence, and gives us leverage we didn't have before. Those things can both be true." It was the kind of brutal honesty that Evelyn had learned to expect from him. No pretense, no softening the edges to make things easier to swallow. Just the truth, complicated and uncomfortable. "So what do we do?" she asked. "We can't have a Southern summit without the Eastern territories. It undermines the whole point." Ryland was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he made a decision that was either brilliant or insane. "We go to them. You and me, small escort, no army. Show them we're serious about negotiation instead of conquest." That's incredibly dangerous. The Eastern Territories barely accepted Lysa as commander. They're not going to welcome you riding in. Probably not, but they'll respect the gesture, and they'll have a harder time refusing to negotiate if we're standing right in front of them. He sheathed his sword. "Besides, you've gotten pretty good at convincing hostile people to listen. Time to put that to use." They left 2 days later with just Dane, Kara, and 6 warriors. Evelyn spent the ride trying not to think about all the ways this could go catastrophically wrong. The Eastern Territories had been Theron's power base, and even with Lysa trying to rebuild trust, there were still plenty of people who blamed Ryland for his execution. "You're doing it again," Ryland said on the second day. "Doing what?" "Thinking so loud I can hear it." He guided his horse closer. "Talk to me." "I'm thinking about how we're riding into territory controlled by people who hate you, with barely enough warriors to defend ourselves, to convince them to attend a summit they've already refused. And how if this goes wrong, we're handing them an opportunity to kill both of us and destabilize everything we've built." "That's a fair summary." "And you're not worried?" "Terrified," Ryland admitted. "But I'm trusting that the people in the Eastern Territories are practical enough to recognize that killing us would just restart the Civil War. And most of them are tired of war." "Most isn't all." "No, but it's enough." He reached over and took her hand, a casual gesture now, but one that still made something warm settle in Evelyn's chest. "We're going to be fine, and if we're not, at least we'll go down doing something that mattered." "That's a terrible reassurance." "I'm not good at reassurance. You knew that when you married me." The Eastern settlement was smaller than the fortress, but more spread out, built along a river valley that actually looked green even this early in spring. People stopped working to watch them ride in, and the hostility was palpable enough to cut. Lysa met them at the settlement's main hall, looking relieved and stressed in equal measure. "You actually came. You asked," Ryland said, dismounting. "Where's the council?" "Waiting, and not happy." Lysa lowered her voice. "Commander Theron's brother is here, Garrett. He's been stirring up opposition to the alliance, and he's got enough support that I can't just shut him down." Evelyn felt her stomach drop. Theron had a brother? 3 of them. Garrett's the oldest and the angriest. He's been calling for your execution since the day Theron died. Lysa looked at Ryland. "He's going to challenge you, publicly, in front of the whole council." "Let him." Ryland's expression was calm, but Evelyn knew him well enough now to see the tension underneath. "I'll deal with it." The council chamber was packed when they entered. Unlike the Fortress Council with its formal structure, this looked more like a town meeting. People crammed onto benches, standing along the walls, all of them watching with the kind of attention that preceded either revelation or violence. Garrett stood at the front, and the resemblance to Theron was striking. Same build, same scars, same expression of absolute certainty that he was right and everyone else was wrong. "Ryland Vane," Garrett said, his voice carrying across the room. "You've got nerve showing your face here after murdering my brother." "I executed a traitor who was stealing from the clan and selling supplies to our enemies," Ryland corrected calmly. "There's a difference. The only difference is that you wrapped murder in the language of justice and convinced people it was legitimate." Garrett moved closer. "But we know the truth. You killed Theron because he questioned your authority, because he dared to say that bringing a human woman into clan leadership was a betrayal of everything we stand for." The room erupted into murmurs. Some agreement, some protest, all of it loud enough that Evelyn could feel the tension building towards something explosive. "Your brother betrayed the clan," Ryland said, his voice cutting through the noise. "He stole food while people starved. He armed raiders who killed civilians. And when he was caught, he tried to start a civil war rather than face justice. Those are facts, Garrett. Not opinions, not political spin, facts that were proven with evidence and witnessed by the entire fortress. Facts according to a Southern spy who'd been here less than a week." Garrett's eyes shifted to Evelyn. "She shows up? Suddenly my brother's a traitor? That's convenient." "I found the supply discrepancies," Evelyn said, standing even though Kara had quietly advised her to stay seated. "The evidence was in your brother's own records. He wasn't careful enough covering his tracks. Or you fabricated evidence to remove someone who threatened your position." "Why would I do that? I had no position to threaten. I was barely surviving council meetings without getting eaten alive." Evelyn moved to stand beside Ryland. "Your brother stole from people who trusted him. That's what got him killed. Not me, not politics, his own choices." Garrett's face flushed red. "You dare speak of my brother." "I dare because I'm tired of watching people rewrite history to make themselves feel better," Evelyn interrupted. "Your brother made bad choices. He paid for them. And now you're using his death to justify tearing apart an alliance that could actually help people survive. That's not honor, Garrett. That's just revenge dressed up as principle." The room went absolutely silent. Garrett stared at her, rage and something that might have been grief warring in his expression. Then he turned to Ryland. "I challenge you. Single combat. You win. The Eastern Territories attend your summit. I win. You leave and never come back." "No," Evelyn said before Ryland could respond. Both men looked at her. "This isn't about combat," Evelyn continued. "This is about whether we're going to keep solving problems by killing each other or whether we're going to try something different. Ryland could fight you and probably win. Then what? Your supporters hate us even more, and we're back where we started. Or you win and kill him, and the fortress descends into chaos, and everyone suffers." She looked around the room. "Is that what you want? More death? More civil war? Or do you want to actually try building something that doesn't require constant bloodshed to maintain?" "You think you can just talk your way out of justice?" Garrett demanded. "I think actual justice would be figuring out how to prevent what happened to Theron from happening again," Evelyn shot back. "Creating systems where people don't have to steal to survive, where commanders can't abuse their power without oversight, where conflicts get resolved before they escalate to execution." She paused. "That's what the summit is for. Not conquest, not power consolidation, actually trying to build something better than what we have." "Pretty words," someone called from the back. "But words don't fill empty stomachs or protect against raiders." "No, they don't. But coordination does. Shared resources do. Having each other's backs instead of fighting over scraps. That does." Evelyn felt like she was back in Red Hollow's trading post, making a pitch she wasn't sure anyone would buy. The Eastern Territories have always been independent, proud of it. But independent also means isolated when things go wrong. The alliance isn't asking you to give up your identity. It's asking you to stop facing every crisis alone. The silence that followed was different now, less hostile, more thoughtful. Lissa stood from where she'd been watching. The girl has a point. We nearly lost everything last winter. If we'd had backup, if we'd had access to fortress supplies, If we'd been part of a network instead of on our own, maybe we wouldn't have lost 40 people to starvation and cold.
43, an older woman corrected quietly. My grandson was the last one. Froze to death because we ran out of fuel and couldn't get more. Exactly, Lisa said. The Alliance might not solve everything, but it's better than pretending we can keep surviving on our own when we clearly can't.
Garrett was still standing in the center of the room, and Evelyn could see him struggling between the anger that had sustained him since his brother's death and the practical reality that isolation was killing them. If we attend this summit, he finally said, not to Ryland but to Evelyn, what guarantee do we have that it's not just theater? That you'll actually listen to what we need instead of forcing your terms? No guarantee, Evelyn admitted. Just my word that I'll fight for the Eastern Territories to have real representation. That your needs will be heard and addressed, not dismissed. And that if the Alliance doesn't work for you, you can walk away. Walk away after giving you access to our resources and intelligence? Walk away knowing you tried something different instead of just repeating the same patterns that keep getting people killed. She held his gaze. I can't promise perfect outcomes, but I can promise honest effort. That's all I've got. Garrett looked at Ryland. And you? You agree to this? I agree that Evelyn speaks for both of us on Alliance terms, Ryland said, and that the Eastern Territories deserve real voice in how this thing is structured. I'm not interested in conquest, Garrett. I'm interested in not watching people die from problems we could solve if we just stopped fighting long enough to actually work together. The room erupted into debate. People arguing for and against, voices rising and falling, the same messy democracy that Evelyn was learning was how real decisions actually got made. Eventually, Lissa called for a vote, and when hands went up, it wasn't unanimous, but it was enough. The Eastern Territories would attend the summit. Garrett approached them as they were leaving. I still think you're responsible for my brother's death. I know, Ryland said, but Garrett struggled with the words. But maybe Theron made his own choices. Maybe I've been too angry to see that. He looked at Evelyn. You've got guts standing up in there, stupid, but guts. I'll take that as a compliment. It wasn't meant as one, but yeah, you can. He nodded once and walked away. On the ride back to the fortress, Evelyn let herself breathe for what felt like the first time in days. They'd done it, convinced the Eastern Territories to participate, avoided violence, maybe even started the process of actual healing instead of just scabbing over wounds. That was terrifying, she said to Ryland. You were incredible. I was making it up as I went. That's what leadership is, Ryland said. Making it up and hoping it works and dealing with the consequences when it doesn't. He smiled at her. But you did more than make it up. You gave them something to believe in beyond just survival. That's rare. The summit itself was everything Evelyn had hoped for and feared in equal measure. Representatives from 15 settlements crammed into the fortress's great hall, each with their own agendas and grudges and desperate needs. The first 2 days were chaos, people talking over each other, old conflicts resurfacing, accusations flying. But slowly, painfully, something started to emerge. Trade routes that would benefit multiple territories. Defensive agreements that didn't require surrendering autonomy. Resource sharing that helped everyone survive winter without anyone going hungry. It wasn't perfect. There were still disputes and compromises that satisfied nobody. But it was real. On the 4th day, they drafted what Magistrate Vex called the Borderland Accord, a formal agreement that outlined the Alliance's structure and principles. Not a kingdom or an empire, but a confederation where each territory maintained independence while contributing to collective defense and trade. Evelyn's father cornered her after the signing ceremony, pulling her into a bone-crushing hug. You did this, Evie. We all did this. Don't be modest. I watched you in there. You were the one holding it together, making people listen to each other instead of just yelling. That's your gift, making impossible things feel possible. He pulled back to look at her. You've grown up, become someone I barely recognize, but I'm so damn proud of I could burst. I'm still figuring it out, Dad. Aren't we all? Marcus glanced over at where Ryland was talking with the Southern representatives. He treating you right? Better than I expected. Different than I expected. Evelyn watched Ryland navigate politics with the same precision he brought to combat. It's not what I thought marriage would be, but it's honest. We're partners, actually, equals, mostly.
Still figuring out the details. That's all anyone ever does. Her father smiled. Marriage is just two people trying to build a life together and hoping they don't destroy each other in the process. Sounds like you two are managing better than most. The celebration that night was loud and chaotic and exactly what everyone needed after days of tense negotiation. People who'd started the week as enemies were drinking together, trading stories, finding common ground and shared experiences of just trying to survive the frontier. Evelyn stood on the balcony overlooking the great hall, watching it all unfold when Ryland joined her. "You're hiding," he observed. "I'm observing. There's a difference." "Fair." He leaned against the railing beside her. "This is what you wanted, isn't it? Everyone working together instead of fighting?" "It's better than I hoped for. Messier, more complicated, probably going to fall apart at least twice before it actually works. But yeah, this is it." She looked at him. "What about you? Is this what you wanted when you started building power 15 years ago?" Ryland considered that. "Honestly, no. I wanted revenge on everyone who treated me like garbage when I was powerless. I wanted to be strong enough that nobody could hurt me again. I wanted—" He stopped, seeming to struggle with the admission. "I wanted you to see that the starving boy you'd shown kindness to had become someone worth noticing." "I notice you," Evelyn said softly. "I know, but that's new. For most of this, I was just hoping, building something impressive enough that maybe when I finally had the courage to come back for you, you wouldn't laugh at how pathetic it was that I'd saved a piece of bread for 17 years. Evelyn felt her throat tighten. "It's not pathetic. It's the most heartbreaking and beautiful thing anyone's ever done for me. It's obsessive. It's love." She took his hand. "Maybe not healthy love. Maybe kind of broken love, but still love. And we've built something real from it. This alliance, this life. We did that together." Ryland pulled her close, and they stood there watching the celebration below. All these people from different worlds finding ways to coexist, however imperfectly. "I kept the bread all these years because it was proof," Ryland said quietly. "Proof that kindness existed, that I wasn't wrong to remember you, that maybe someday I could build a life worth living instead of just surviving." He paused. "I don't need proof anymore. You're here. This is real. And that's better than anything I imagined. Even with all the complications? Especially with the complications. Perfect would be boring. This is—" He searched for words. "This is messy and hard and constantly surprising, and I wouldn't trade it for anything." Evelyn kissed him, right there on the balcony, with half the alliance potentially watching, and didn't care who saw. Because this was her life now, built from impossible choices and unlikely partnerships, and the strange alchemy that turned transactions into something that mattered. 3 months later, Evelyn was in the fortress library when she found the last letter. It was tucked into one of Ryland's old journals, sealed with wax and addressed to her in handwriting she recognized immediately. But unlike the other letter, the one he'd written preparing for his death, this one felt different. She opened it carefully. "Evelyn, I'm writing this the night before we leave for Red Hollow to defend your father and your town. I don't know if we'll succeed, but I know that whatever happens, I need you to understand something. I spent half my life building power because I thought that's what it would take to deserve you, to be worthy of the girl who showed me kindness when I had nothing. But I was wrong about what you needed. You didn't need me to be powerful or impressive or feared across the borderlands. You needed me to be honest, to trust you with the truth about who I am and what I want, to stop treating our marriage like a debt to repay and start treating it like a partnership to build. So this is me, being honest. I love you. Not the memory of you, not the idea of you, the real you, complicated and stubborn and smarter than me about most things. You make me want to be better than what I was built to be. And if we survive tomorrow, I'm going to stop hiding that. Ryland, P.S. If she is happy without me, I will survive that too. But if she's happy with me, I'll spend the rest of my life earning it. Miss Parte. Evelyn read it 3 times, tears streaming down her face, before she went to find Ryland. He was in the training yard, working with new recruits from the southern settlements, teaching them clan-fighting techniques, integrating them into the fortress's defense systems. He looked up when she approached, saw her expression, and immediately dismissed the recruits.
What's wrong? She handed him the letter. Ryland read it, and something shifted in his expression. Vulnerability and fear and hope all mixed together. You weren't supposed to find that yet. When was I supposed to find it? I don't know. Later. When I was braver. He set the letter down. I wrote that before I understood that you didn't need grand gestures or perfect declarations, that you just needed me to show up and do the work. I need both, Evelyn said. The showing up and the honesty about what it means to you. I need to know I'm not just a political alliance or a childhood memory, that I'm actually important to you beyond what I represent. You're everything to me, Ryland said simply. The alliance, the fortress, all of it. It matters because you're part of it, because we built it together, because I spent 15 years surviving on the hope that someday I'd find you again, and now that I have, I don't know how to imagine my life without you in it. Evelyn crossed the distance between them. Then stop imagining it. Stop preparing for me to leave or die or decide this isn't worth it. I'm here. I chose this. I choose you. Every day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Why? Because you're worth choosing, not because you're powerful or because you saved Red Hollow or because of some childhood debt. Because you're honest with me even when it's uncomfortable. Because you trust me to stand beside you instead of behind you. Because you're still figuring out how to be human after spending years being just the alpha, and I like watching you do it. Ryland pulled her close, and they stood there in the training yard while recruits pretended not to watch, and the fortress continued its daily rhythm around them. I don't deserve you, he said quietly. Probably not, but that's not really the point, is it? Evelyn pulled back to look at him. We both started this thing thinking we had to earn each other. But maybe that was wrong. Maybe we just have to choose each other and then do the work to make that choice mean something. That's terrifying. Everything about us is terrifying. At this point, it's basically our brand. Ryland laughed. A real one, full and genuine. Fair point. The seasons turned as they always did. Winter came and went, and the alliance held. Not perfectly, but well enough that people survived who wouldn't have otherwise. Trade routes flourished. Defensive pacts prevented raids before they started. And slowly the frontier began to feel less like a place where people went to die, and more like a place where they could actually build lives. Evelyn and Ryland built theirs together, day by day, crisis by crisis, learning as they went how to be partners instead of just allies. It wasn't easy. They fought about strategy and priorities and how to balance the fortress's needs against the settlements. But they fought fair, and they always came back to the same truth. They were better together than apart. 2 years after the Borderland Accord was signed, Elder Mora died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 84. The fortress mourned her like the foundation stone it had lost. At her funeral, they discovered she'd left letters for everyone she'd mentored, sharp observations and hard-won wisdom written in her precise handwriting. Evelyn's letter said, "You came here as a transaction and became a leader through sheer stubborn refusal to be less than what was needed. Never forget that the best things in life are built by people who don't know enough to realize they can't do it. Keep being impossible. Mora." Ryland said, "You spent 15 years building power to protect one girl, then discovered that power is worthless without someone to build it with. You finally figured it out. Don't waste it." Mora. They read the letters to each other that night and cried together for the woman who'd seen them more clearly than they'd seen themselves. "She was right," Evelyn said, "about everything." "Usually was," Ryland agreed. "Annoying trait in a person. We're going to have to figure out who leads the council now. We'll figure it out, same way we figured out everything else, badly at first, then better with practice." It was the most honest assessment of their leadership style Evelyn had heard, and it made her laugh despite the grief. 3 years in, the Alliance faced its biggest test yet, a severe drought that threatened every settlement from the mountains to the plains. Crops failed, water sources dried up, and people started making the calculations that preceded violence and desperation. But this time, they had infrastructure. The Alliance pooled resources, diverted water from territories that had it to territories that didn't, coordinated relief efforts across hundreds of miles. It wasn't enough to prevent all suffering. People still went hungry, some settlements still struggled, but it was enough to prevent collapse. And when the rains finally came, washing away months of dust and fear, people remembered who'd kept them alive. Not just Ryland or Evelyn, but the whole messy network of cooperation they'd built together. "We did it," Evelyn said, watching rain pour off the fortress walls and turn the courtyard into a temporary lake. "We actually built something that works." "We built something that works sometimes," Ryland corrected. "That's probably the best we can hope for." "I'll take it." 4 years in, Marcus Mercer died quietly in his sleep with his daughter holding his hand. He'd lived to see Red Hollow prosper, to see the alliance solidify into something permanent, to watch Evelyn become someone he barely recognized but was fiercely proud of. His last words to her were, "You did good, Evie. Better than good. You built something that matters. Now keep building it." She buried him in Red Hollow, in the cemetery behind the trading post that had been his life's work. The entire alliance sent representatives to the funeral, warriors and traders and settlers, all coming to pay respects to a man most of them had never met, but whose daughter had changed their world. Ryland stood beside Evelyn through all of it, steady and present, letting her grieve without trying to fix it or make it better. Just being there, which was all she needed. "He would have liked you," Evelyn said after the ceremony. "Eventually, after he got done being angry that you took me north." "I didn't take you. You chose to come." "I know, but he would have been angry anyway. Fathers are like that." "Mine would have sold me for less than you're worth," Ryland said quietly. "So I don't really have a frame of reference for fathers who actually care." Evelyn took his hand. "You will. When we have kids, you'll figure it out then." It was the first time either of them had mentioned children, and Ryland looked momentarily terrified. We're going to... Eventually, not now, not with everything still so fragile, but someday." She smiled at his expression. "You're the most powerful alpha in the Borderlands and that scares you?" "Terrifies me. At least I know how to handle politics and combat. Children are a complete mystery. We'll figure it out, same way we figured out everything else. Badly at first, then better with practice?" Exactly. 5 years after their marriage, the Borderland Alliance was no longer an experiment. It was just how things worked. New generations were growing up never knowing a time when territories didn't cooperate, when winter meant isolation instead of mutual support, when raiders controlled the frontier instead of organized defense networks. It wasn't perfect. There were still disputes and failures and moments where everything felt like it might fall apart. But it held, because enough people had decided it was worth fighting for. Evelyn stood on the fortress walls, her favorite spot, the place where she could see both worlds at once, and thought about how far they'd come. From a desperate girl in a failing trading post to a leader who'd helped reshape the entire frontier. From a transaction to a partnership to something deeper that didn't have a simple name. Ryland joined her, as he always did eventually. "What are you thinking about?" "Everything. Nothing. How strange life is." She leaned against him. "Do you ever think about that day? When you walked into the trading post and asked me to marry you?" "Every day." "Do you regret it?" "Not for a second." Ryland turned her to face him. "I spent 15 years building toward that moment, Evelyn, and then I spent the next 5 years discovering that what I'd built toward was nothing compared to what we built together after." "We built something good, didn't we?" "We built something real, which is better." And standing there on the walls of a fortress that had become home, looking out at an alliance they'd forged from impossible circumstances and stubborn hope, Evelyn finally understood what Mora had meant. The best things in life were built by people who didn't know enough to realize they couldn't do it. She and Ryland had been those people, a trader's daughter and a traumatized alpha, both of them broken in different ways, both of them trying to build something that made sense from pieces that shouldn't fit together. And somehow, impossibly, they'd succeeded. Not because they were perfect or because love conquered all or any of the pretty lies people told themselves, but because they'd shown up every day and done the work. Even when it was hard, even when they didn't know if it would matter. They'd chosen each other, built together, survived together. And that, Evelyn thought, was enough. More than enough. It was everything.